Hello, Global Theater. My name is Gerry Fialka. Today is March 6, 2024. We want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast, I'm Probably Wrong About Everything. Also want to thank Arjun von Camera for introducing me to today's guest, Michael Kieran Harvey. Is that how you pronounce it, Kieran?
Absolutely. You got it right first time.
Dude, one of my best friends in Flint, Michigan was Kieran. I'll never forget him. So when I wrote your name, I was like, wow, I love that name. Where in the heck you calling in from, Michael?
Calling in from Hobart, Tasmania.
First question is, what is the best thing for a human being?
Well, to flourish.
To flourish. Wait a minute. I can't believe this because the guy I interviewed yesterday said the exact same thing. And I've never got to flourish at all. And then I get it 2 days in a row. Can you explain that phenomenon?
Only that I'm not very original.
Oh, well, wait a minute. 40 years of no one saying to flourish and then two people say to flourish. That's original, dude.
Oh, I don't think so. Who was your guest? I mean, I think
he's
very right.
Funny because he's from Australia and he teaches Irish studies. His name Ronan McDonald. But to flourish, just suss it out. What do you mean to flourish?
Well, I guess it means to be able to operate and feel some sense of satisfaction with what you're doing, and it's not really. I mean, I'm very skeptical of the idea of happiness. I don't think that's the point of life at all. But the idea that you can pursue your curiosity and live a life that feels in some way that you're contributing something that you're doing is in some way useful, to sort of quote Arnold Schwarzenegger. I've come to really like that guy. He's very endearing, even though I don't agree with him on many things.
You know, he rides his bike along Speedway, the first road next to the boardwalk in Venice. Like every Sunday, you can find him riding. I've actually wanted to pull up next to him on my bike and ask him this incredible question I have, but I've never done it. But
you should. He had a good answer.
Did you see his?
Did you see him on Colbert?
Yeah, the questions on Colbert. I loved it. It was great.
It's great.
Yeah. No. But the sad thing is, I heard from a friend he used to hit his wife in public at restaurants, like whap her. Arnold did, and it was disarming. I mean, that people had seen it and blah blah blah. So, anyways, I don't mean to discredit, but because we both found him endearing in that questionnaire, and I find that questionnaire intriguing because I kind of ask stupid questions like Colbert does too, and a couple of them are a little deep, but he's,
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, the sort of cancel culture that we've got would probably, if that's true, about him assaulting his wife, would mean that we'd never hear from him again. I don't know. I mean, it's the same in art when you have, great artists who are terrible human beings. How do you assess the art? That's one of the perennial questions. I guess it's just up to the individual. I mean, my experience is of a succession of people I've held in high regard being totally undermined by their own flaws. And that's the experience of age. You can't have any heroes. But I do think that through all of his trials and tribulations, he's certainly kept trying to flourish and kept trying. I mean, he's said some fairly courageous things as well.
Exactly.
Which I think are in stark contrast to a lot of politicians. So
No,
You know,
he's articulate. I mean, Pumping Iron, I used to show that film. He's had a huge film career in
and
so
reinvented and consistently. I
yeah,
mean, that's really why I was attracted as a young bloke to Frank Zappa, because
yeah.
I saw the same thing operating in him, and I really respect that sort of constant self-education, and
Yeah.
comes from being, you know, the autodidact comes from a sense of always wanting to learn new things. Similar to you, just the just the brief scanning I've had of all the amazing stuff that you do. I don't know how you keep a handle on everything, Gerry, but
Well,
I
I
think
do it by just
you're a very
doing
good
what I'm
example of
doing.
yourself.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that because I do that by doing this, by talking to people. And it's
Mm,
like now it's so easy. You find someone on YouTube who talks for 3 minutes about something, and they teach at this university, and there's their email, and and send them an invite, and then all of a sudden I'm interviewing them. So
mm.
it's pretty amazing how accessible this live TV across the world. We're on live TV right now. We can just meet each other. One time I says, "Hey, can I interview you?" My friend goes, "Can't we just sit here and talk?" And it was like, we've never sat and talked, Michael, and this is a chance for us to sit and talk, but it's
Yeah.
in this incredible realm. We're framed like this, and I have this script, and I'm going to go through it, but we're going to be able to go off and divert like this. Because one thing I was going to bring up before you brought up Frank was his great line, "I'm a failure, but I'm not a miserable failure." That is an amazing line because me and you don't think of Frank as a failure, but he knew that he was human and he failed in some ways. And I saw him sing Broken Hearts Are for Assholes in Vegas, of all places, once. And as he's pointing at kids in the audience, "You're an asshole, you're an asshole," he pointed at himself and he goes, "You're an asshole." To me, that was just like, okay, Frank, you're human and you're willing to say that.
Yeah, it's a sort of a driving force, isn't it? Then I mean, I heard your interview with Arjun, and for the first time, I realised that he also thought he was incredibly ugly, and that
That
was a revelation.
the he was Frank or the he was Arjun? Who was the he? He was
Oh,
incredible.
Frank Zappa thought he was ugly, which was the total. I mean, the aura that he had, of course, in the 70s when I got into his music. I was very young. I was about 11.
Yeah.
Um, I was of some satanic, magnetic personality, a sort of Aleister Crowley figure.
Ah,
And of course, that was the attraction. And yet there was this incredible way that he used to educate you,
yeah.
knowing full well who he was attracting, educating particularly young blokes to think a bit deeper about
Yeah.
than the surface of what his albums and persona represented. And I think that was the clever thing. And I also like the respect I have for his output is just
Yeah.
extraordinary. Being able to sort of fund his serious music obsession by
Yeah.
his commercial activities, and the amount of energy and drive that he had obviously came from these feelings of not being worthy or somehow.
Yeah.
And that's just such a great album title. I mean, song title, isn't it? Broken Hearts Are for Assholes.
All of it. It took
Sort of
me,
like, it's so consoling, isn't it? Not.
yeah. And it's like, it took me 50 years to really get the joke. We're only in it for the money, because
Oh
it
yeah.
just became this title, and I just go, "We're only in it for the money." That's the money album, money. I never in about a half a year ago, I started to crack up. I was like, "This is funny. It
Yeah.
is really funny." So, you had two things. What album did you start with at age 11,
Oh,
or
it
video,
was
or what?
Apostrophe, I think.
Oh, that was a good start. So we'll get back to Frank, but the other one is, We never knew.
I particularly enjoyed that because of the depiction of the Catholic Church. I was going through my own rejection of Catholicism at that
Yeah,
stage, and
yeah,
I just thought, yeah,
yeah,
he really helped me because I didn't have any information. There was no internet there. It was very difficult to go against, your family and the whole culture. Like
yeah.
if you grew up,
Yeah,
in a Catholic
I was an altar boy, and I
Oh God,
knew.
so was I, and it
Yeah,
was a
I
verb.
was like
It
this.
was a verb in my case,
Yeah, it's
and
like
it's
this.
like that's what they
No,
used to do to you.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's like Dominus vobiscum ecum spiritu tuo. Like I memorized that, and all of a sudden I'm rocking out to my rock hero, and he's singing the lines I used. Well, have you seen the outtake for Keep It Greasy on YouTube?
Oh no, I
Keep
must check that.
Dude, you will freak out. It's 1 minute, 2 minute clip of Frank singing an outtake from Keep It Greasy, and he reveals this immense thing about his belief in God.
Right.
I mean, I'll just summarize it. He basically doesn't get taped and he goes, "You Hollywood engineers, I laugh once a year and you forgot to hit the record button." And then, the engineer, you can hear his sound. "Oh, I'm sorry, blah, blah." Frank goes, don't worry. God probably didn't want it in there anyways. I mean, literally, that is like, this guy is like Louis Buñuel. Thank God I'm an atheist. They exist in regurgitating in push and pull with their whole upbringing. They don't say I'm not a Catholic or I don't believe in God. They just want to use that as part of their sussing out, what did this do to me being raised this religion? So that it comes across as though they hate religion or they, think it's a scam, but they know it's so ingrained in him that they'll never. It's like one person taught me that Frank reverently satirized what he loved the most.
Yeah.
So he loved black culture. No one makes fun of Bob Marley or Jesse Jackson, let alone a white dude.
No.
But
Yeah.
when you hear in Joe's Garage, we're jamming.
Yeah.
This guy is like making fun of Bob Marley. Like, you don't do that,
Yeah.
especially if you're a white dude.
That's
So
right.
he reverently loved it, but he knows that's
Mm.
what I'm going to make fun of.
Yeah.
But the
And
Crowley thing.
he was on to Michael Jackson too. Please read
Oh
this
yeah,
pamphlet.
it's endless. But how about the Crowley thing? We didn't know. Like I sort of knew through reading interviews or whatever what Frank read, what books he read.
Mm.
And no one knew he read Crowley, as far as I knew, until the auction for all, Amit, the estate sold all this shit. And there were like 10 or 20 books, and there was a Crowley book. And we're
Yeah.
like, oh my God. Because, Crowley's in that weird, devil worship, Kenneth Anger, Jimmy Page world. So you wouldn't think Frank was reading Crowley, but Crowley's a philosopher, but he got, demonized for various reasons. And I'm not debating whether it's worthy or not, but he's, the occult is a area we didn't think Frank dabbled in.
Well, it's also one of the alternative ways of living your life. I mean, he was a great libertarian,
Yeah.
but he was also, as far as I know, anyway, always exhorting, particularly young people, to get to a library.
Yeah.
And that's a very unusual thing for a rock star to be saying.
Yeah.
It's sort of a bit counterintuitive, but he was. There was always a sort of exhortation in his, just in his lyrics. They were always full of information and full of the reading that he'd obviously done, and quite apart from his very skeptical view on American politics and so forth, consistently. So it was very much with Frank was, think for yourself and educate yourself as much as possible. And it's very good advice for young people generally. And I think the Crowley thing is really just representing independence of thought, which I think is free thought, which is what Zappa was identifying. Anybody that put themselves on the line like that has to be respected for standing up against the establishment view. And who can forget Zappa going up and testifying to Congress about freedom of speech and rock lyrics, etc. And we've got this sort of censoring happening again, like with Eurovision, about it's relentless, the free speech sort of problem. And you've just I look at America, I just look at your politics and think how it's so bewildering to me to see the same situation that when Trump was first elected, I went into a completely downward spiral. I thought it was the end of the world, and here we are again. And it's
spooky. Yeah, it's spooky, and it's something to we can get into it more, but
oh no, don't. I've got no expertise in that area, but it's just from the point of view of having voices, strong voices, like Zappa, being able to speak out instead of just kowtowing to all of the censorship that's going on. I mean, I'm not saying that I'm advocating open slather. That's what the sort of hate speech feeds off as well. But there is a distinct lack of a voice like Zappa, I think, in the music scene.
Yeah,
and just like in my field, it's really pathetic.
Yeah, no, I know what you're saying, and I think also, just to go back to Crowley for a second, because you brought us right back into the script with that last statement, is there's books that are in the air when people are out and about, and that was, Crowley was in the air, people were reading him. And just like More Than Human by Theodore Sturgeon, that Frank said, that's my favorite book, and so did Phil Lesh of the Grateful Dead. And then, he's a known science fiction writer. I've been dying for someone, especially a Zappa person, to read it and go, why did Frank love this book so much? Well, the title says a lot, More Than Human. But anyways, this is the next question, Michael. Why do you think humans collect or gather information?
Well, I think we're a curious species. I think that's what drives us.
Yeah.
And, I think really we're all of the creativity that we display is part of that, trying to make sense of the information that we keep getting. And I think that's just the nature of our minds, that we do know that we're going to die, and I don't think other animals know that, and so it makes us extremely curious about big questions of existence, and that's why we try to find some information that might console us in that in that particular enterprise. I mean, if you look at this phenomenon of the TED Talks, I looked up a couple of them just a few days ago. They're dealing with subjects like, how to manage retirement, i.e. try to find a purpose in it, purpose for your life in it. They're looking at, subjects like what is it like to die? And these are all things which are extremely fascinating and important for people to find out about. And of course, you can't find out about it until it actually happens to you. And I think it drives all the sorts of things as like the exploration of the universe and the search for a unified theory. All of those things, I think, come from the same curiosity, which comes from our fear of death and knowledge of our inevitable death.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that's why. That's why we gather information.
Yeah.
Just as a reflex action. I don't even think we're aware of it. It's just we're sort of attracted to new things, new
Right.
information. Is
But
the news going to be any different today? Oh, no, it's not. But I'm still curious about it,
I was so curious. It's amazing. But is this need or want to collect information more innate or more invented?
I don't know. There are some things which, when you're growing up, you learn and then you think they might be innate. I think that would be a very good area of research. I'm sure somebody's doing it, but I don't know. The question of what nature or nurture is another question, which is really linked with that big question of our finiteness, and it's just as inscrutable, and it's a huge philosophical question, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you saying I don't know, because I want people to feel they can say I don't know, or I can't answer that question, because I'm not trying to put you on the spot. That's totally valid response, and I appreciate you being honest like that. Do thoughts create emotions?
Well, that's another chicken and egg thing. Thoughts can be emotions. I think they're superposed. I think it's something. Being a musician, I'm dealing with trying to turn ineffable things like emotions into music, and it's peculiar because it's got a subjective aspect to it. So what I think is a particular emotion may not be perceived as that by somebody listening to it. My thought is that it is an emotion, a particular emotion, but it's up to interpretation by another mind. So I don't know. I have to let that go.
Well, that's the job of the artist, is to make the art, in my opinion, and then it's no longer theirs. Then it's the user, because the user could do whatever they want with it. And so that's amazing. So fill in the blank. I don't know what I think until I
do it.
Do it. Yeah, McLuhan says, I don't know what I think until I say it. Joan Didion says, I don't know what I think until I write it. Can humans think without language?
That's a very good question. And I think it's beyond my job description to answer that one too.
But what's your hunch?
That's what we do is we've learnt to link thought with language.
Yeah.
And you'd need to talk to Noam Chomsky about that.
Now you really have ESP, because here's the next question is Noam Chomsky. How did you do that, Michael? You have ESP complete. I love when people say, but it is funny because I like that it's really me and you versus the wording of the question. It's not so important you answer the question. It's me and you psychoanalyzing the wording. So I'm open for changing the wording or going off on diapers. The questions are just prompts for us to talk. So here's the Chomsky saying: a language is not just words. It's a culture, a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. What do you do when language doesn't work? When language breaks down, what do you do?
Yeah. He's very interesting. It's coming all to a head, of course, with AI and these large language modules.
Yeah.
Which he maintains are just a tool, and which some philosophers believe, Tegmark particularly believes, are nascent intelligences. And it's, for me, I look at it with, I'll be honest, with horror. I think the embracing of AI is it is really opening the door for autonomous AI. And I do think it's not just a simple tool, as, for instance, nuclear technology was a tool, which also had a possibility of wiping us out. We at least had a human on the button there. But if I don't want to be one of these doom mongers, but I do worry about that, and it's pertinent to your question, because it's about thought and language, and these larger language modules, whatever they are, that's what they do, is they are constantly being updated with our information. I think we've made a big mistake by making all our information digital, which could be sucked up very quickly by a similar digital-based intelligence. And I really wonder, what people like Frank Zappa would say about this situation, because I think it is really unprecedented. I don't think it's a simple tool. It's going to the heart of what makes us human, which is our language. And it's also coming at it from a completely alien angle. It doesn't have our culture, and it doesn't have our environment where we learn our language, which is in sort of a loving family situation generally, ideally. So it's that sort of compassionate element is missing.
There's two things you touch on there, and back to Zappa. Frank said there'll never be atomic bombing because there's too much real estate involved. They'll never push the button, but again, who knows? And then the other one,
I don't know whether that's still the case with somebody.
Right? No, yeah, I know. That's he probably said
acting like a divorced man.
Yeah. No, it's
against the wall.
change. He
Hmm?
said that back 20, 30 years ago, but I always love it because it's funny in a way. He's like, well, there's too much real estate involved. So it's sort of a brush off comment, kind of Lenny Bruce smartassism, but it still reeks of a little trueness, a little, like McLuhan said, a half a truth is still a lot of a truth. But Frank also,
If you're at the end of if you're in the last phase of your life, you're going to be too worried about real estate.
yeah, that's right. And so the other one that Frank said was, when he got the synclavier, he says, I would have never gone on the road if I had the synclavier and played with real musicians. It's like, no, Frank, thank God you needed to go stand in line at a taco stand on Melrose, like you see him doing in a movie, and being a normal person and, doing things to live the life, to write the songs that you wrote. You couldn't just be in your little cabin room and not have humanity. Even if Bob Dylan's knocking on your door asking you to produce his album. So, but basically, Michael, you're at a grocery store and you're buying something and there's a communication breakdown. What do you do? I mean, or your communication breaks down with your wife or your kids or your friend. What's like one strategy that you do when there's language breakdown?
Oh, well, just gesticulation.
That's good.
Generally, you can get by with body language and pointing and that sort of thing. I mean, those relationships have disappeared, of course, at grocery store. They're now overtaken by corporations, and it's all just pick and choose your preconceived shopping list without, it's becoming really like the curated music that you get. It's not like walking into a library and having accidental associations or things crashing in on by chance, serendipity. It's about what you want before you go in, and that's what happens. So that ability to communicate, I think, with people is we've lost that, and I agree with you. I think we are becoming more isolated as a result, and that desire of Zappa really is indicative of an early vision of what even creating music is like now. I don't know. I feel very a lot of empathy with Zappa's situation, because dealing with other people and musicians particularly is very difficult and frustrating.
Yeah.
And he had extremely high standards, and that's also a difficulty when you're dealing with people where he's asking you to do things which you're not trained for. So I think one of the things I most admired about his music was his ability to traverse so many different genres and so many different ways of making music, which involved all of his experiences, as his training as an advertising executive, and not executive, but as in advertising, and he was something of an artist as well. So the visual aspect was important to him, and he expected his musicians not only to be great improvisers, but also great readers. And really, this was a very unusual thing in the late 60s, early 70s. There were other people doing it, of course, but not to his sort of level. And he managed to, I think he managed to train some of the greatest musicians through his band.
He pulled one of Frank's great traits is that he pulled out of these people something they didn't even know was in them.
Yep.
Like you list George Duke on your list, and it's like I don't play ice cream changes. I don't play a synthesizer. And he's like, okay, just play it. And then then that pulled out of George this diversity. I once saw him say to Chad Wackerman, play a Dave Clark 5 beat. And I was like, he probably doesn't even know who that is. But it was just a stupid rock beat. But also what you said is, I got this directly from Shelly Manne, the great jazz drummer. I says, what was it like to play for Frank? He said, he knew what he wanted and he got what he wanted. Now that's a flip, because Igor Stravinsky said, most people don't know what they like what they know. So if all you give kids is Crosby, Stills, and Nash, then they'll go, what do you like? They'll go Crosby, Stills, and Nash. Now, this is great, because the next question is, again, it doesn't mean you have to answer it, but just your observations of humans in general. Are we more feeling beings or more thinking beings?
I would say that Rousseau has won, don't you?
Well, summarize what you think Rousseau is telling us.
Well, he's the reaction to the Enlightenment. So he's all about feelings.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's evident. Certainly, I don't think there's a lot of thinking going along in the political processes anywhere. And I think it's leading us to this problem, as Rousseau led us to the world wars in the 20th century. They were all about romanticism. And I think this whole idea about feelings being, you can't trust them. And you do need to temper them with education and thinking. So I think it's, what was your question again? What is superior?
That was brilliant what you said. You can't trust feelings. You're saying that Rousseau was all about causing World War II because we went to feelings.
No, he didn't cause it, but it led.
I'm sorry, that was the wrong verb. Yeah, that it led to world wars. So the question was, is that really enlightened me? I appreciate what you just told me. Are your observations of humans in general, are we more feeling or more thinking beings?
In general, I'd say feeling. Yeah.
Okay. Now here's two questions from Alan Turing, 1950s. One, is thinking a function of the soul?
That's from Alan Turing?
Yep.
Wow. Well,
because it goes along with what you were just teaching me about Rousseau. It kind of molds.
Don't take me as an expert on Rousseau. It's just that I know that he's the reaction to all of this sort of soulless, supposedly soulless Enlightenment, overthrow of God and religion and everything. And he undid it all, and people went with his ideas, and really, I think what Turing's trying to get at is it sounds to me, I don't know, but is this sort of test about it's all related to his work in trying to work out how you can tell if a robot thinks or not, isn't it?
That's the second Turing question. Can machines think?
Yeah, and I think the question, it's really coming to a head now, and I don't think it's looking good. I am not qualified in this area, so I'm just speaking from what I see. I've written the only way I can deal with it is by writing music. So I write pieces basically out of my own feelings. ominousness about this age we're living in. On the one hand, I'm fascinated because things that I read about, science fiction things that I read about, are now reality. Things that were postulated when I was a boy, like the Higgs boson, have been discovered. And there are all these extraordinary advances. So I've gone off the rails here again. I've lost my train of thought.
That's all right. What you'll see, Michael, so much comes back around. Let me just go to the next question, and you will see it's just like this conceptual continuity that Frank talked about.
I was about to.
You touched on this. Do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
Oh, definitely meaning.
Yeah. Because Viktor Frankl said meaning tends to last, happiness doesn't. Does the brain more detect consciousness or create it? Like, is consciousness there bubbling away and we're more so detecting it or more so creating it?
Again, I'm not qualified. I'm fascinated by Don Hoffman's view that the universe, once you get rid of space and time, is just consciousness. I think he's wrong, but I don't have the tools to argue why he's wrong. And I do think that there is a reality out there. So, which is just there despite our minds. I don't think it's a Kantian mind-centered universe. Yeah.
What's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
I really can't comment on that.
Fine.
Except they've proven that in the Nobel 2022 Nobel Prize, they've proven that the universe is not locally real. So apparently spooky action at a distance is possible. So something is faster than light. Is that right?
Well, I always say when people say speed of thought, I say there's no right or wrong answers, but that one you got right. Because it seems to me that thought is faster than light because we thought up the speed of light. But there's no right or wrong answers. It just prompts. Here's a poet, Audre Lorde. You can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools. Yvonne Rainer responded, said, you can if you expose the tools. What new tool do you suggest? And let me put in the context. Just because I open it with a cute quote doesn't mean you have to apply it. The basic question is, what tool do you gravitate towards? You can add new if you want, and you can add dismantling the master's house with the tool if you want. So it's sort of like, again, you put it into the context you want.
I think you've got me there. There was a famous black woman, African American woman, who wrote an essay using that quote. I remember reading about the racism in America. I think it was in the 70s. She was writing. I forget the name, but it's. So you're asking me which tool?
What tool do you gravitate towards?
Skepticism.
There you go. That is a great tool. What new toy do you suggest?
New toy? Well, it's not new.
That's fine. What toy do you suggest?
I I've got to say, in my own case, CBT.
CBT. What's that stand for? What is it?
Cognitive behavioral therapy.
What's the
Uh,
first word? Oh,
cognitive behavioral.
cognitive behavioral therapy. Okay, that's good. Is that based in Young?
No.
No.
Albert Ellis, I believe.
Oh, okay, Albert Ellis. Okay, thank you. Yeah.
It's not new though.
But that's all right. That's what I'm saying. The
I
question.
found it extremely useful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's great. What do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
I don't, but I always wake at 3 and it's Halloween.
Wow, I wake about 2, 3, or between 3 and 4 too. But what
Every
is it,
freaking night.
but what does it mean it's Halloween? You wake up and it's
Everything is dreadful.
oh, it's spooky. You wake up and it's dreadful. I see. It's not
Sometimes
a
sometimes I have to walk outside and
yeah,
around the house a few times.
yeah. Well,
And
that's funny because
honestly, Gerry, I don't think if people are not waking at 3 a.m., they're not normal.
it's like Network, the movie, but it is funny because it's ironic. Frank's favorite holiday is Halloween, and he was more like it's fun and carefree and wild, and you're like dread. But maybe he did think of it as covering up the dread with false, mask.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't possibly psychoanalyze Frank. I think he's beyond that. But yeah, he strikes me as somebody who was occupied most of the time. Like,
Yeah.
he strikes me as a workaholic, and
Oh yeah.
I've stepped back from that definitely since I did my PhD,
Yeah.
which I did late. I finished it in 2018, and I did it for reasons of trying to work out the ontology, if you like, is a very pompous word, but just the essence, the being, the where it the isness of what I'm doing, and to try to take some time because I've got the luxury of doing that. I'm extremely
Good.
lucky.
Yeah.
To try to work out what is the meaning behind what I write or what I'm doing, and so forth. And I've found it extremely, there's all sorts of societal pressures to be like Frank, a workaholic. It's how you sort of justify your existence. But I think it's now, for me anyway, I've stepped back from all of that and having a very interesting time. It's extremely, and honestly, the 3 a.m. stuff is because your subconscious just works and works, and
Yeah.
you'd have to be a completely shut down, I think, if you weren't worried about things and worried about the state of the planet, worried about the world, and so forth. I have no difficulty getting off to sleep. It's just that the subconscious is working, and comes to start. That's when it all bubbles to the surface. And I look at it now. I don't worry about it now, and I don't look forward to it, but I tolerate it and think, well, this is for me anyway. It's normal. It's
Yeah. Well,
and
it sounds like what you did, which I kind of wish Frank would have tapped into, is you found a way to chill out, and you found like yoga. What if Frank would have found yoga and practiced it and chilled out a little, cool it a little on the cigarettes, and maybe he would have lived longer. But in my opinion, I don't regret it. he lived for 50 years and he gave us 30 years of music. And it's like, hey, I did my duty, man. I did a lot. And so, you know, people, oh, he died young. He says, what do you mean? He put out 60 albums in 30 years? Give me a break. That's a lot.
His output is astonishing.
In all the interviews, it's amazing. So this is McLuhan learned from Ezra Pound, the poet, that artists, musicians, everybody who does this creative stuff they're the antenna of the race. They're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions. So we might learn how to cope with what we don't like about our inventions. Kind of like what you were talking about. You learned how to cope after this PhD with societal things. So there's hidden psychic effects with being a workaholic. But then what's deeper? So the artists sometimes broadcast these hidden psychic effects, but we tend to ignore them. So I ask you, Michael, the question Marshall probed his whole career. Why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I don't know psychologically why people don't engage with the ramifications and they just accept. I think it's a combination of factors, and there seems to be like a collective Stockholm syndrome operating with people, where, I mean, you mentioned Frank and his smoking. He's a really, really intelligent guy who must be aware of all of the problems associated with that particular vice, because since the 1930s, you know, German scientists knew of the effects, and yet embraced this as I think he called it food at one stage. Saying these aren't drugs, these are food. And it's to me, it's a disappointment, because but then every sort of hero or genius seems to have an Achilles heel, a blind spot which they don't look at. And I probably have thousands of them, but it's collectively we are sort of reared to hold completely conflicting ideas in our heads. So that has something to do with it. Like if you're raised in a particular religion, like Catholicism, you're indoctrinated into holding completely contradictory concepts as something of a virtue. And if that's extrapolated, you know, like the idea of faith is supposed to be a virtue, where it's really just ignorance and superstition, and that's something which characterizes a lot of humans, and I think is behind the embracing of things which are, you know, so destructive to our
Well, here's Michael, what I react. Duchamp said there's no solution because there's no problem. So if indigenous cultures start smoking tobacco, and then the Germans say in 30, this is addictive, that's because they're going to start putting pesticides on the tobacco. And that's what killed Frank probably more, was the pesticides on the tobacco. He found something in smoking that was like food. It was comfort food for him. So we make Yeah, we make a value judgment and says, Frank, I know his kids had hated that he smoked and blah, blah, blah. But we make this value judgment. And so, you call it Achilles heel. I know that. But again, it's like we tend to want to make value judgments on certain things. And we say science. Okay, Frank, science proves that this isn't good for you. I just want to eat shitty food and I want to go write my music. So that's more important to me. So I'm not trying to rationale it because, again, hey, when he got cancer, he should have stopped smoking and stopped drinking coffee, but he didn't. So maybe it cut his life shorter, but it is this thing, the follow-up question.
You're right. You're right. I mean, that's. I mean, we look at it. I look at it anyway as something that he could have done to probably stick around a bit longer. And
Yeah,
that's reasons.
Yeah, that's fine. You're a concerned human. You're like, hey, dude, I don't want you to die. You're doing too good. You don't want to die. You got more music to write. Yeah. But it is funny because my biggest line with Frank is he taught me how to embrace contradiction. And you just told me something that's amazing. It's the flip. You're saying Catholics taught us how to hold contradiction as a virtue. So it's almost like those two things clash. That is embracing another contradiction, that I was raised Catholic, Frank was raised Catholic, you were raised Catholic, and we were taught to hold contradictions as a virtue. And I take that as the main thing Frank taught me, which is, you got to love the cops as they beat the shit out of you. Or how about this one? Nothing is what I want. What does that mean? That's embracing contradiction as a virtue. Nothing is what I want. But here's the follow-up question, because it will sort of flow into the
contradiction. Also, a great musical process.
Yeah.
So yeah. Anyway, or artistic process, really. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. And so, do artists have moral obligation?
Oh, very interesting question. Have you read Drawing the Line by what's his name? I think Eric Mathis.
I don't know that. Tell me about it.
It's a philosopher trying to work out how one should respond to artists whose work is great but who are completely deplorable people.
You mean how to separate the art from the artist?
Yeah, or does it affect, or should it affect one's, valuation of the artwork? And it's incredibly interesting because there's been so many high-profile instances of people recently being cancelled because as artists because of their proclivities. And
Frank got canceled when he said, I want a Jewish princess. And Lorraine Newman, who's Jewish, said he's saying he wants one. With Titanic zits and sandblasted zits, it's like, I want one of these. Well, the Jewish whatever called him, they busted him saying, you're anti-Semitic. It's like Frank wasn't anti-Semitic, he was anti-semantic.
Right.
but I know what you're saying, because Frank would have been canceled major. You see that one, so many bad Zappa documentaries, but one of them, they use the line in contemporary society now. I'll go home, I'll go home and rape the cheerleader will help me with my paper, then I'll go home and rape her. I mean, that's you. It's like, dude, you shouldn't have put that line in the movie now, because the Me Too movement. But the filmmaker put in that's what Frank, he was satirizing this, and so I know
he did leave himself open, didn't he?
And he got busted all the time.
I look at the past. I've one of my concurrent heroes when I was a boy was Franz Liszt, and he, the great Hungarian composer, and he similarly associated himself with anti-Semites like Wagner,
Yeah.
But at least with it would have been very easy also for Liszt to end his life as an anti-Semite, because it was such a huge part of German cultural life. But he did come out at least and say, "I am no anti-Semite,"
Yeah.
in print, because and that was because he fostered people like Mendelssohn
Yeah.
and Jewish people who he knew. Liszt also suffered from the fact that he married writers. So when his relationships or marriages came to grief, they sort of vilified him, and it took a very long time for him to be rehabilitated. And he's sort of a similar figure to Zappa in my mind, because of the reach he had. And the intelligence that he had. Liszt, for instance, as a piano player, stopped doing concerts when he was 38. He just said it's a mug's game, this touring and stuff. And he was quite right if you looked at, the incredible. He was another workaholic, but he wanted to be recognised as a serious composer. So he withdrew to a centre, Weimar, and then became active just as a sort of musician within that area. And this desire to really make his mark as a serious composer is a connection I see with him and Zappa. That now, of course, Zappa's music is being played by the establishment as if they always loved him. But of course, they gave him a terrible time. As they did to many rock musicians. I also knew John Lord of Deep Purple, and he also had the same experience with people. You're a rock guy, you couldn't possibly know what you're doing in the classical sphere. And I always, this arrogance of classical music to these people who were, who they weren't even a bootless, match with as musicians, is something that's always really annoyed me about classical music. It's why I describe myself as a pianist rather than just as a classical pianist, because I see these characters. Liszt was one of them as well, who had this amazing curiosity across all genres and could do it and train themselves to be able to work with musicians across all genres and all ethnic boundaries, which were considerable in Liszt's day. But also Zappa, his wonderful celebration of black musicians and women musicians was one of the great aspects of his diversity, which I really do admire.
Yeah,
and that's something which, coming back to your question about, what about the moral aspects of being a musician? I think one has to really you have to come to your own decision about the worth of the art once you know about the person's individual. And I think there are things that an artist does that are beyond the pale and are simply cancelable. Of course there are, but I'm always reminded, of we get in the classical side, we get the canon, right? And the canon's basically German, and the German canon stands for civilized music. And you have to remember that this civilized music is what the Nazi elite were listening to as Berlin was bombed. They thought it was the downfall of civilization. So the German canon that they were listening to, their Beethoven, their Strauss, their Bruckner, all of this is what led to them ultimately. That's not civilization. So it's these are questions where, okay, do you cancel Karl Orff because of he flourished under the Nazis? I don't know. I've sung Carmen Burana. I've also played it, and it's done. It's something which now we have with Russian music. Do you play Russian music? Personally, I've cancelled it, and I don't know how they're going to dig themselves out of this one. But it's just when you see, it's part of the consequences of doing what they've done.
Yeah.
The whole country is stained, even if they've left and object
Yeah.
to the country.
It's,
But it
it's
is a serious and very vexing question, which each individual has to, I think, make up their own minds.
That's a slippery slope, Michael, because Sam and Dave were hired to play Trump's inauguration. Are they like great R&B soul musicians in America, wrote great songs? Hold on, I'm coming. Yes. Are they in need of money? Maybe. They offer them a gig. They go, we need the gig. We play it. Doesn't matter who we're playing it for. Do you say, I'm never going to listen to Hold On, I'm Coming Again because they played Trump's inauguration? Separating the art from the artist is an individual thing. You go on it like you do. But I wanted to go back when you said Frank celebrated Black music and women. That's funny because people don't usually say celebrate women. And do you know this? Because I know who. You must know who Nadia Boulanger is.
Yeah, one of the greatest teachers and composers.
Louis Saul was one of Big Zappa guy was one of her students, and he played It Must Be a Camel, an arrangement on the piano once, and she hated rock music. And he goes, let me play you a Zappa song. And she goes, that's good. That's a pretty good story to, huh?
She was no fool.
No, she was no fool. Can you conjure up your earliest memory ever, or one of them?
My earliest memory?
Yeah.
Yes, one of my earliest memories was falling in love with the cover of a 45 RPM of the Master Singers of Nuremberg, because it had the most beautiful woman on it. I don't know why. Red-haired woman. Well, sort of reddish.
Well, this is a 12-inch or a 45?
No, 45.
Of a 45
for some reason. And I ended up marrying her.
Oh, that is amazing. How old are you?
Oh, I don't know, 5.
At age 5, you saw this picture and you married that woman?
Well, I ended up, yes, with that sort of archetypal.
Oh, you married one of them, not that. I see.
No,
oh, that's beautiful.
And sort of imprinted the ideal woman and that sort of stupid music.
Stupid anyway. Music, but beautiful woman. Is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
I think it depends. I think that's how the music business operates, on nostalgia.
Yeah.
And if you're in the area I'm in, which is trying to promote things people haven't heard before, it becomes a problem.
Right.
Interestingly, music that I hated at first, when I remember I first started playing boulez, and I really hated the style and the music. And now I look back on it nostalgically with great affection. It just sounds, it takes me back. I used to pick out all the jazz chords in boulez because I thought that was his own particular joke. He had a wicked sense of humor, boulez. Anyway,
that is cool. You ever see that David Raskin interviewing Boulez and Frank at the same time at UCLA?
No.
That was
Boulez had a great deal of respect for Zappa, didn't he?
Yeah. Well, we got the one album. Okay, so tell me someone within your immediate family, please, just briefly, and then outside your immediate family, who had an impact on you, kind of like a role model, and what specifically was that impact?
Oh yeah, that's interesting. Look, I'd have to say my mother did. I disagree vehemently with my parents, but I have to acknowledge that it was my mother pushing the music of Olivier Messiaen on me that was something that I finally twigged at quite an old age. I was in my 20s, I think. That quite apart from his overt religiosity, there was something in the music that was extraordinary, and it wasn't related to the religious aspects of things at all, despite what he said. And I'd resisted it because my parents are so staunch as Catholics all my life, run away from it, if you like. So in a sort of inverse way, I'd have to say my mother, and a person outside, I would have to say Nigel Westlake, who's an Australian composer. He's a film composer. He wrote music, which you might know, for the film Babe, the pig film,
Okay.
and also Miss Potter. But he's a very fine musician and also Zappophile. In fact, he founded a band called the Magic Puddin' Band, which was one of the early, if you like, Zappa tribute bands, although they weren't doing Zappa specifically. But he was somebody who I looked up to at school. We went to the same music school together, and he was really somebody I was influenced by. Very fine. Is a very fine clarinetist, and one of our greatest composers.
Beautiful. Now, you brought up religion. Do you pray?
What?
Do you pray?
Is this a trick question?
That is now, Michael, you really won. The purpose of this series is to invent new questions. So when someone answers a question with a question, that's just, you win. That's it. It's beautiful. No, it's not a trick question. It's really just wondering if you pray.
Of course not. But then I'm wondering if, like, oh, do you mean, do I have internal dialogues or something? Which of course I do, and everybody does, or wishes, which of course I do, and everybody does. But
that's a question I usually ask 2 pages down the script, but I'm going to shoot it in now. What language is your interior dialogue in?
Well, it's generally in Australian.
Well, what form is it in? It's more metaphorically, not being literally. What metaphorically is your interior dialogue in? What form?
I've honestly never really thought about that. I have vivid dreams on occasion, which are sometimes fairly. You have that experience of déjà vu. So I've obviously thought of something before, which is not verbal, but I'd say as a it's interesting when you ask that question, like if you apply it to when you're composing. One of the reasons I liked Zappa again is because he represented like Liszt and like Messiaen, like, I don't know, Beethoven, many great musicians. They're sort of tapping into something which is both intuitive and process driven. So they're after the spontaneity, if you like, of improvisation, along with married to the rigor, if you like, or the structure of theory, etc. And Zappa studied theory. He's no idiot. And orchestration and those sorts of things. But what he was after and what he was pushing his musicians to do all the time, which is so frustrating for them and for him, is to try to get to this nexus point, which is impossible. It's like catching the perfect wave of spontaneity and rigor, which is where the sort of fascination or the compelling musical moment seems to exist. It's like trying to put your finger on Quicksilver. So thinking when I'm thinking musically has that sort of aspect. I'm always trying to catalyze. Okay, I can keep going along like this, but it's sort of, now it can be like, well, an AI could do that. So is it worthwhile? This is where, Zappa's rhythmic thing, because he trained also as a drummer, I believe. He was always frustrated with the sort of 4/4 of so much music, and he was always trying to catalyze it. Things like Zombie Wolf, there's time signature changes in that all over the place. To try to upset the sort of nice predictability of music, which again it's got so many tendrils back to this sort of problem that Rousseau represented, where composers like Mozart, etc., reacted against the Enlightenment, if you like, constructed music of composers like Bach. They were looking for the freedom of music and the expressivity of just the melodic line. So the whole structural thing got simplified. The vertical got simplified to the horizontal, and it's something that, okay, you listen to it, but it the predictability of Mozart particularly is something that just lulls you into this sense of almost tranquility, which is the antithesis of somebody like Zappa, who's trying to grab you by or Beethoven, if you like, who's trying to grab you by the throat all the time by catalyzing that that horizontal approach. So that's what, I don't know what's happening there, but it's a combination of memory and of the different types of memory, sound, and the various ineffable things you put on sound, like color, texture, timbre, all those sorts of things, where you're trying to get to a compelling musical outcome. And that's a distillation process, which again is very much evident in Zappa's music, particularly his serious music. I recorded a version of Ruth is Sleeping, which is a synclavier piece he wrote, which is on a 2-piano score. And he said it's possible on 1 piano, so that's why I did it. In fact, that was where I met Arjun von Kammerer, because I did this recording of this piece last century, and Arjun had bought it and couldn't believe I was living in the same city as him, that is Hobart, and that's when we first met in 2010. But that piece, Ruth is Sleeping, is a very, very distilled composition, and incredibly also incredibly condensed, so that to do it, it's almost impossible to do it on one keyboard, but I found a way of doing it, which is sort of my thing. I like those sorts of puzzles, and it represents that every second every microsecond, if you like, is thought about as a compelling musical moment. This is something where the tradition, the great compositional tradition, say from Stockhausen, is evident in Zappa's music, because that was Stockhausen's. He came from the great Wagnerian German tradition as well, where every new piece is a completely new, invention of the wheel, and a tremendously draining, exhausting sort of way of looking at producing stuff. But every moment, and in fact, Stockhausen wrote a piece called Moment. Every moment in his music is supposed to be compelling and distilled like this for communicating power of musical thought.
But let me just clarify that, Michael. Let me just clarify what you just said. Are you saying if you take form and content, Stockhausen was saying he's reinventing the form as well as making up content as he's making up music? Like Frank didn't just write these rock songs on Apostrophe and Overnight to be, when we first heard him, we go, Frank sold out. Sounds like, and then we realize this is the shit that holds up, because he's introducing this stuff in the midst of a normal rock song that is like beyond even, Stockhausen or those guys, or like Stockhausen, and he's reinventing the form. Is that what you meant when you said Stockhausen? Every piece is more like he's reinventing the form and not so much the content, or as much as the content, but not just the content. Is that what you meant?
Well, I meant it in terms of the musical moment. I think that's what was driving both of them, that they wanted.
That was driving them. That they were constantly.
There's an element in Zappa's music where you feel the same sort of frustration with, the business as usual concept of a rock song or whatever. That it's not an interesting enough form for him. So he either introduces a whole series of time signature changes or harmonic elaboration, but it's a restlessness with his music that you don't you hear less and less now. This awful sort of vanilla diatonicism that we have now is in stark contrast to a lot of those experimental groups of the 1960s who were in. Don't forget, Stockhausen was on the cover of the Sgt. Pepper's album of the Beatles as a significant influence, and his musical genre is coming out of trying to embrace, scientific procedures with music, as well as, some of Stockhausen's wackier ideas, spiritual ideas. And so they were manifesting themselves as actual musical processes.
Yeah.
And it's something that, was really, the first time Stockhausen visited Australia, he visited Hobart, and they basically boycotted him because they just couldn't. It's just like
what year is that about?
About 1960, I think. Tasmania is very peculiar. It's like the Strindberg's people of Hemser, and like anything new is very problematic for the established hierarchies. So Stockhausen, he may as well have come from outer space. But
that's what I like about Stockhausen. Sun Ra, Stockhausen, and Question Mark and the Mysterians are the only three guys, because I'm not into UFOs, that claim they're from outer space. I believe those three guys. Those three guys are from outer space. But let's go.
Let's not get into rail or any of that nonsense.
Say it again.
Let's not get into rail and any of that nonsense. Rail, the UFO people, the UFO cult, as in Israel, but just Rail.
Well, I'll check it out. I don't know about them, but anyways.
They were total wackos. Anyway, yep.
Okay, but
you would
here's
know because they're based in America. But anyway.
okay, Rail, RAIL. I'll look it up, but I'm not a UFO, as Mats and Morgan say, ufology. I'm not really into ufology, but
I got sucked into Von Daniken. I'm never going back there.
Well, Frank, the Inca Roads is probably one of Zappa's greatest songs. It's all about that. So, anyways, it's all good. People can think or believe what they want. But here's the thing. I asked for 90 minutes and we're almost there, 90. Can you go longer now?
Oh, if you're not bored with me, I thought you'd be bored way before.
Oh, no, I'm not bored at all. But I mean, you want to go another 15, 20, or 30 minutes?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, that's fine. So let me just go off on a tangent because you brought this up. And I know it's important to you because I read an interview with you about this. And it's close to what you said about spontaneity and rigor. That's a really good, thing. This nexus, you talked about spontaneity and rigor. So I worked for George Carlin, the comedian, and we got a flyer in the mail and it said, I'm trying to get more control over my spontaneity. Now that's funny. That's, I saw Frank conduct and rehearse his band once for 12 nights in a row. And so, the Klonmeister would rehearse the band for 4 hours, then Frank would come in and rehearse the band for 4 hours. It was more playful and more strict than a concert. In a concert, it was this strict and this playful, but it was even more so in the rehearsals. He wasn't in front of a big audience. I always felt I was attending a Igor Stravinsky conducting workshop, watching this happen. And I like that, Frank, you understand he came from his intuitive side. Where did he get all this? But he also was influenced by Varese, Spike Jones, and Johnny Guitar Watson, just to nail it down to a few. And so Harold Bloom says you absorb your influence, then you abandon them. And Frank was said to have asked, what is genius? And Frank said, genius is when you steal from someone and they can't tell who you stole from. Now, we know, studying Frank for 5 decades or more, we know Frank stole from Varese and Spike Jones. He's a Spike Jones wannabe. It's easy. And Johnny Guitar Watson. But he did invent something new. He was an alchemist, much in the way Preston Sturges, filmmaker, is. They take two known things, put them together, and invent a third unknown thing. Like Frank took rock and theater, put it together, and or as John Smothers put it in Baby Snakes, Frank played orchestral music with a rock band. He wasn't like Moody Blues and playing rock and having the orchestra enhance the rock music. He was playing orchestral music with a rock band. And so how, talk about that in regards to the creative process. How do you, because you have a great sense of who influenced Michael, how do you absorb your influence and abandon them? I listened to your album, I don't know what you would say, deconstructing Zappa or reconstructing Zappa. What's the name of that album where you do all Zappa songs?
Oh, they're actually original compositions. Do you mean 48 Fugues for Frank?
Yeah, that's what I mean. You call their original pieces. So I started listening to them and I goes, where is Baby Snakes in here? That was brilliant. But you know what I'm saying? What is the process of you absorbing these influences as you're growing up and then abandoning them? Is there a process? And how's that related to spontaneity and rigor? You talked about that nexus.
Yeah, it's interesting. I guess again, it's taking something that is a concept and trying to see what the answer is from your own musical history, and yet pushing you into a new area. So with me, I took the sort of idea that Frank professed to hate counterpoint. So the worst thing you could do was write a fugue. So that had to be in the title somehow. 48 is, of course, the famous fugue cycle of J.S. Bach. There are only 10 pieces, not 48, in the album. So again, it's sort of ironic. I also use the wonderful concrete poetry of Arjun von Camera. So they're visual poems to sort of bounce off as well. The intuitive aspect of it is just coming from my own musical language, but I'm using particular chords that are sort of things that I associate with Frank Zappa, or gestures that I associate with Zappa's guitar playing. Particularly, I always found the most beautiful guitar solo ever for me was his Saint Etienne.
Yeah.
And it's unsurpassed as far as I can see in the rock literature. And so that was the piece of music that I wrote, was something, again, Liszt used to do this. He tried to channel Paganini in his works. Paganini was a violin player.
Yeah.
And Liszt basically said at one stage, "I too am a painter," quoting Michelangelo, saying basically I can do what Paganini's doing on the piano. And in a way, that was my homage, to see if I could do what Zappa was doing, transfer it to the piano.
Yeah.
And I have always felt, for me, I've stuck really strongly with the piano, because although it is a bourgeois sort of instrument, it's something that you can control and work out musical ideas and full sort of musical ideas, similar to an orchestra, but without the hierarchy problems of an orchestra, and without the bombast of an opera or a orchestral sort of expectation. And if you can write well for the piano, it's a very difficult instrument to write well for, and for that reason, it still maintains its challenge. And so I wanted to see if I could do what Zappa was doing with his entire genre. So a lot of the pieces are referring to his very broad genre, right up until Civilization Phase 3. And it's trying to, it really is a homage to his influence, and my gratitude for him being around at a time when I was going, as I said, I didn't have any information like the internet when I was growing up. All I had was his lyrics, basically, and his example of how to live as a musician. And I've always found that the example of how to live in a particular time period as a musician is even more important than the music sometimes, which can be dated, etc. But the attitude, the way of looking at society, the way of being able to operate outside of societal norms because you don't agree with them, and yet live with integrity, is something that I, like. You can list. I could list hundreds of people like Pauline Oliveros, Nadia Boulanger, who you talked about, Elizabeth Lutyens in England. There's so many musicians who have found a way of living in spite of the times and the societies that they live in. And
Yeah.
that's the important thing for a young musician, is to see how to live. It's more important than the music. And that's
Yeah.
definitely what Zappa represents. He lived his life as an artwork,
Yeah.
and with
It wasn't
all of
just music. It was Frank's interviews, his films, everything
yeah,
he did was he was a composer. That's what he wanted to do. But
yep.
you brought up an interesting thing. Your main instrument being the piano. McLuhan says everything we invent extends some humanness, like human sensorium. Knife and fork extends our teeth. Shutter in a camera extends our eyelid. Maybe even religion or philosophy, non-tangible, extends consciousness.
Yep.
What does the piano extend for you? What humanness?
Well, it's very easy. One of my heroes growing up was Glenn Gould, who I never
Yeah.
saw. I never saw video of him until much later. I only heard the recordings, and when I did see him play for the first time, I was astonished how close his head was to the strings.
Yeah.
It is contorted, and it's an awful posture. And please, any young people listening, do not adopt that, because you'll have terrible problems. But he represented physically what how the instrument should be played, and the instrument is played with the mind,
Yeah.
played with the fingers,
Yeah.
and you achieve that sort of lack of uh, there's so much concentration on the machinery of playing an instrument, the hands, the fingers, the arms, the
Yeah.
posture. And then you've got the mechanism of the actual piano itself before even a string is sounded, which
Yeah.
is probably enough. Um, and the whole, I think the whole point is to get. I hesitate to say be at one with the instrument, because you never are. It's
Yeah.
a struggle, but to achieve this sort of flow where you've got direct, you can, and that's why you practice, is to try to get rid of all of that, so that you can just do something spontaneously with your mind
Yeah.
at the time. And the if I look back, and if I think about times when I think I've come close, it's always because I've been able to forget about myself completely, and
Yeah.
just allow my mind to project through the instrument. And it doesn't really matter even what sort of quality instrument it is,
Yeah.
if you can do that. If you there's this sort of terrible snobbishness about pianists and piano playing, and I always hate that, and I detest the concert ritual, and I detest the audiences, to be quite honest, because they're all looking at music as an exam half the time, whereas it's about the content, it's about the composition, it's about the humanity that comes through from another person's brain. And if you listen to early recordings, which are done on instruments that are terrible, sometimes they're out of tune, it doesn't matter, because there's this extraordinary diversity of approach, diversity of personality that comes through. Art Tatum, Rachmaninoff, recordings of Brahms even that exist, and the playing is all over the shop. It wouldn't pass a basic high school music exam these days, possibly, but it's there's this extraordinary fragility and humanness about it, which is the point. And
Yeah.
I think the whole 20th century sort of got rid of this in the pursuit of some sort of CD perfection about music performance. And again, going back to Zappa, because he seems to be our yardstick. That was what he wanted. He wanted this roughness and spontaneity, and he wanted to push people out of their comfort zones as players, at the
Yeah.
same time having them so well rehearsed that there was no danger of the whole thing falling over. And
That's Gerry Player. The more you practice, the luckier you get.
Yep.
Yep. And so Don Preston told me this when I asked him all these questions. He said, don't think. And it's like, good luck, because, Monk said music is math. So, you described that well, how you can master the math of music and then get to that point where you're like Glenn Gould, who hung out with McLuhan, by the way. There were pals, Gould and McLuhan. So here's a screenwriting teacher told me great art is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Kubrick says the opposite. Great art is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. What role does intention play in your creative process when you're writing a Michael composition? Not commission, nothing but just pure Michael composition. What role does intention play?
That's it. Who is your first quote from?
Screenwriting teacher. He said, great art is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Kubrick says the opposite.
Yeah, I'd have to, I'd have to agree with Kubrick. I just recently saw Barry Lyndon. After I thought I can't without seeing that film, and I'm very glad I did.
But on the big screen or on a little TV?
Well, they're just streamed. I've got a fairly large TV. But
a large TV. No, you got to see Barry Lyndon.
Again, it's about the content rather than the spectacle for me. Kubrick, I saw AI, and that was a life-changing film for me.
You mean Spielberg's AI?
Kubrick, I think he started it. And
he started it, but
died halfway through.
Then it got Spielberg. Go ahead, tell me about it. Tell me about it. It was a life-changing film for me because in that it was the most extraordinary scene where the robots come back, and it's all about memory. That's what they value, and they want to come back and they're not really robots; they're cyborg things. They're looking for the memory of the Blue Angel, and they come back in this machine, which is a quantum machine, like a spaceship, which just simply folds up and disappears behind them into thin space. And it's the most extraordinary scene. It's always stayed with me. But it was prophetic, wasn't it? This whole thing about whether it's the thing about electric sheep, if they dream, that whole idea of are robots going to be like us? Will they have these feelings? Will they have art because it gives them pleasure? Those sorts of questions. And to get back to your question about where I'm coming from, it's not important where I'm coming from. I don't really think what I do is important anymore. I'm sort of at a time of my life where, as I said, I'm just taking stock. But I have recently written these pieces. I've called them my war sonatas, 3 war sonatas, and I'm playing them this year on my birthday in July in Melbourne because I just want to do it. And they came out of this absolute, it's my 3 a.m. Halloween again, about why is this happening? And the 3 of them, I took different sort of aspects of it. The first one's come out of the Russian invasion. The second one is dedicated to Arjun, my dear friend who's got me through so much shit. And the third one is called Writing with Death, and it's really about AI. And I use the Leonardo da Vinci cartoon on the frontispiece of it, the one with the woman riding the skeleton, which Basquiat did a painting of in the 1980s as well. Because this is what is driving me at the moment. Could an AI do what I'm doing? And I think it could. And yet I try to write in a way that would second guess. So
I'm trying to go against everything that started with my PhD. I'm looking for something that is so uncopyable or unable to be processed and spat out by a machine. I was so, when I finished these pieces, I was so upset that they were shit that I sent them to a colleague of my wife and I. My wife runs the School of Music down here at the university in Hobart, and one of her friends is Michael Finnessy, the great British composer. And I sent an email to him saying, could you have a look at these? I think they're shit, but they're all I can write at the moment because I'm so traumatized. And he wrote the most lovely thing back. He said, they are what they are, basically.
Yeah.
That was his comment, and sort of keep going type of thing. And it's one of the most wonderful things to receive from a venerable composer like that.
Frank
I
said,
don't know if that answers your question, but
it answered it well.
Yeah, and really, when you look at art forms in music, it's you could possibly say something like, well, it's really the improvised music which gets as close as we can to the ephemerality of what it is to be human, because it's not really capturable when it's done not according to, say, mathematical formulas, as Thelonious Monk might say. But say you just go totally off script, like the free jazz of Albert Ayler and people in the 60s, which again I'm sure Zappa was aware of, is something where they're reacting against a whole hierarchy of whiteness that is evidence in music. And the only way they could do it was to totally reject all of those structures and all of those heads, everything that smacked of oppression, And I feel very oppressed by the, I'm very lucky being an old white bastard, but I feel very oppressed by this idea of AI just sapping all of my creative ideas. Like the writers in Hollywood, even for once, I feel sorry for them because it's existential crisis for creativity, which is something I never thought I'd see in my lifetime. I don't know how you feel about it, but
well, I would just say briefly, one thing I heard about AI is it's in its infant stage, and it's our job to raise it well. We invented it, so we can raise it well. So that's the AI movie. Frank said, "Don't stop."
Have you been in this situation? I was in this situation where our national broadcaster, the ABC, I'm a highly trained musician, right?
Yeah.
And I responded to a survey that the ABC presented early last year. Can you tell which of these 10 pieces was AI generated? There were 10 pieces, and you had to
guess.
Right. Okay, guess. And I only got 7 out of 10, right?
Well, that's
and
so.
I mean, okay, I'm just stupid. I accept that.
But that's like
Keneally, for me, that's a real worry because
I wouldn't worry about it. I would keep critically thinking and processing all your thoughts and breathe deep and feel it out. Keneally played a piece that a computer played for Frank. Frank composed a piece that Keneally played, and he was like, okay, you're hired, because you can't play that fast. The computer played it. But anyways, Frank said that great line, don't stop and keep going. So it's sort of like with Michael, give you that, hey, nod. That's great. Keep going. 2, the Balinese have no word for art. They do everything as well as they can. That's one of Marshall's favorite lines. So that's really, as soon as we name it, oh, that's AI music. Oh, that's human-made music. Well, it's just music. And then however it's made, I mean, that's like the guy who invented the bumper sticker, drum machines have no soul. I said, dude, that's like saying chairs have no soul. Everything we invent is just an invention. So what you meant to say is, according to my aesthetics, people, some people use drum machines and they don't sound soulful. He said, that's too long for a bumper sticker.
Yeah.
But here's the question.
I mean, talking of drum machines, I mean, Conlon Nankara made
Caro,
a whole career out of player pianos.
hello. Yeah.
Yeah, which is the same, it's the same sort of thing. How creative can you actually be with that?
And amazing. He changed my life, because I was driving to work, working for Frank once, and Conlon and Carol was on the radio, and I missed my exit and I was late for work because it put me in a trance. I says,
Yep.
Frank, it's your fault because the fucking Conlon put me. But Trimkin, and he was so into Conlon's scores. He'd go, is this like a ripped piece of paper? He goes, quit bugging me. Conlon, what a great guy. Another great Italian. But here's the question, Michael. Duchamp said there's no art without an audience. How much are you thinking of your listener when you're composing your piece?
Well, I go back to Babbitt's essay, Who Cares If You Listen, which wasn't his original title, but he had a point where he sort of equated what he was doing with what a nuclear physicist was doing. And he sort of had this luxurious sort of position at Princeton. And he was responsible, Babbitt, for the efflorescence of what is now disparagingly known as PhD music. But I think that his attitude is quite interesting, because in a way he represents half of what Zappa was doing with his serious music, not caring about the audience, simply pursuing his curiosity. And then very cannily, with the other half, making money out of his more serious, more commercial music. And doing it independently. I believe Zappa had one of the first private music studios in America. If I'm
well, it's funny because this is a question. Yeah, Studio Z. Because I always say this, Michael. Frank was say, I only make music for myself. If other people like it, that's a bonus. Well, Frank, I think you're over romanticizing the process, because you were raised in a consumer culture. You knew that if you played these notes and these words, you might be able to sell your music so that you could go write the music you wanted. Like Charles Ives, another great one. He says, hey man, I got my cash coming in through my insurance business. I can just play whatever I want. And so I think Frank knew he was writing. He said, I had to sing Dynamo Hum 1,000,000 times to pay for Baby Snakes. So he knew, and he also said, I'm a devout capitalist. So he knew, even though he said, I only write this music for myself, that some of it would sell. Because as soon as he started selling his 45s to Art LeBeau, like the world's greatest sinner, because it was something he could get over on Steve Allen's TV audience, he knew that. But it was, he wanted to romanticize his art process, which is fine. I'm not saying I busted him.
But so, I mean, even somebody like Milton Babbitt, who wrote music which was so unplayable that he would have to have people studying it for a year or whatever to produce it. And when the National Endowment for the Arts and the funding for universities sort of started drying up, I remember I had a conversation with him in the mid-90s, and he just said, everybody's leaving. So my music doesn't get played. But even he had an outlet, a more popular outlet. He's a very fine jazz player, so he would play jazz in clubs, etc.
Did he really? That's good. I love to hear that.
Yeah, but I mean, he had a point, and I guess with my own approach, it's okay. Well, I was so worried. I don't know why, but I just needed some. When I sent this sent my sonatas to Finnissy, I just wanted somebody who I respected to evaluate what I was doing, because it was so uncompromising what I was writing. But at the same time, I then got a commission from a young harp player. I've never written a harp piece, and I think it's an extremely difficult instrument to write for. You can only use 4 fingers of each hand and all that sort of thing. It's like very, very tricky. And then I said, well, look, I will write you something, but I don't know whether you'll like it. And she said to me, I'll like it because it's written by you. And I said, okay, well, I'll see what I can do, and wrote her this piece and sent it. And I said, look, I will need help with the technical aspects of it, so let's collaborate a bit on that after you see the first draft. Send her the first draft, and she said, I think it's unplayable, but I love it.
That's what.
And then I thought I'd never hear from her again, but she's just contacted me last week, so she's probably see it through. But that was something which I was imagining her playing it. I knew her as a student.
Right. That was commission. I wasn't asked about commission because that's what, when Kronos Quartet commissioned Frank, he wrote 3 movements and they said, we can't play the 3rd movement. He says, then drop it. And they did. And I talked to them way back when that was. I says, who's the hardest composers you've ever dealt with? He says, Elliott Carter and Frank. And it's like, Frank's a mad scientist. When these guys commissioned him, he'll go, I'll show them. That's my opinion. But again, he knew they were paying him money and he was being able to be as creative as he wanted. But you brought up
that has to be said is the reason I was interested, particularly in Ruth is Sleeping. Briefly, what had happened, I was in touch with Gail I was teaching at that stage and wanted to do a retrospective of Frank's music because he was perfect for a music department of diverse, opera, dance, jazz, classical. You could do his music and involve all the students. So I was trying to put on a concert. I was trying to put on a concert of his music, and was in this sort of and anyway, I was in contact with them, got the music, got it all arranged, and we'd rehearsed it and everything, sold all the tickets out of totally sold out. And his lawyers got in touch and said, you can't go ahead. And it wasn't him, but it was his lawyers apparently. So we had to pull that concert. I was incredibly disappointed, but I said, look, I'd really like to, as a wooden spoon, could I possibly get the rights to record his Ruth is Sleeping, which it was his only piano piece, and he'd written it for 2 pianos, and it was on I think the Yellow Shark album played by Ensemble Moderne. And I said, I want to have a crack at doing it for 1 piano. And that's really why I went to America. The only way I could get money to go to America was to say I was going to do a piano competition. So I entered that Ivo Polgarellic competition, which was in Pasadena, specifically because it was close to where Zappa lived. And I ended up, but by the time I got there, he was very ill, of course. And on the day, I kept getting through the finals. Finally, I won the bloody thing, but he died on the day I won it.
My God!
The only reason I went there in the first place was to meet him and get the rights to record Ruth is Sleeping. So, and the reason I did that was because at the time I was pitting myself against computers and pitting myself against computer music. That was my thing. And his piece, Ruth is Sleeping, was one of the most difficult piano pieces I'd ever come across. And so, of course, I wanted to play it. So,
did you meet Frank?
No.
You mean you were dealing with Gail?
I never corresponded with Gail too. I never met
And then
her.
Gail gave you the permission to record it after he died.
Yep.
For some reason, they pulled the whole concert. That didn't make sense.
As I found out later, it wasn't Zappa's thing because he said he was very sympathetic with students, but it was just like a blanket thing. They didn't, at that time, they didn't allow other groups to play covers of his music.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was quite devastated. The kids were quite devastated too, but out of it came that recording.
Is that all documented?
How I met Arjun.
Say it again.
That's how I met Arjun. So it was a good outcome.
Right. And now I remember how I met Arjun is through Simon Prentice.
Simon Prentice. That's the one. Yes.
But is that story of you winning the day Frank died documented in a blog or any document or any interview?
I've got it in somewhere.
Somewhere it's documented.
It was 1993, ages ago.
It's 1993.
Yeah, December. What was it? December 14, I think.
Yeah. Okay, so you mentioned Albert Eiler. Both him and Cecil Taylor are listed on the list of influences in Freakout.
Right.
Two of my film heroes say this mantra: ignore yourself. Jonas Mekas, there is no self-expression. And Cecil Taylor says, I'm just a vehicle and this stuff just comes through me. Is art making, music making more self-expression or more you're a vehicle for whatever technologies, cultures, and environments are dominant?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think they're intertwined. You can't help being a product of the cultures and so forth you've been brought up in. I think it's very interesting because of the question of appropriation, etc. And it's one reason why, at the moment, we're having a very soul-searching debate. We had something called the Voice to Parliament, where our Indigenous people wanted a voice in Parliament, and that got rejected as a referendum. It's a big shame, I think, for Australia, and it's about how they feel left out of the national conversation, and a lot of musicians, white musicians, have made capital off their music, etc., and so on and so forth, and yet those white musicians are born and bred in Australia, and yeah, I just think it's a very vexed and difficult area of that it's so intertwined, those two, the self-expression and the cultural background of what you're expressing. I look at a popular artist like Eminem and think it's a similar thing, that he's sort of strongly advocated for his right to do what is fundamentally a black person's heritage. I've always seen it as problematic. For instance, Aboriginal groups playing country music, and yet they're totally entitled to do so.
Or Frank's business card. His first business card was composer, master blues guitarist. That's like, yeah. So, but you said two things. There are two things I have to slip in. They asked Nancy Sinatra, when did the mob enter the music business? She says, honey, we invented the music business. It's like, that's when music first got, as soon as we recorded music, we ruined music forever. That's my opinion. You ruined it. It's a ritual that's supposed to be here now, live in the moment, music. And then Frank said on Dinah Shore, if you've never seen that, look it up. It's one of the greatest interviews with Frank on YouTube. And they go, Dinah Shore, DINAHSHORE. She's she had a talk show in America, and
she's interviewing Zappa.
Yeah, and she says, what do you think of the music business? He goes, well, the important word there is business. They don't care about the music. But the real hidden question in what I was asking, Michael, is can art making, music making be egoless?
Well, I don't think so. As I said before, I think there's a huge amount of ego in thinking that you can live your life differently to other people, and be a musician, identify as a musician. That being said, the most the greatest musicians I've ever come across have been the humblest people, and don't care about the whole,
Yeah.
the whole respect thing. They're just interested in following their curiosity. So yeah, I think the ego gets. I mean, it depends if there is actually an ego at all. It's just a question of, this is what I get pleasure out of. I think,
Well, it's
and
perfectly.
this is what I,
Yeah.
and for me, it's my favorite ensemble at the moment is the sextet that I hear at my farm in the Central Highlands in Tasmania. I've got a tiny little block right in the middle of Tasmania. We've just had the very worrying time with the fires, which are just every freaking summer now. But my favourite sextet to listen to up there are the Six Magpies that get up on the
Yeah.
telegraph wires, and I can listen to them all day, and they are the most astonishing egoless musicians I've ever come across in my life. And
But they're animals. They're not
their
human beings.
song is never-endingly elaborating and
Yeah.
wonderful. The Butcher Birds, on the other hand, they just do ostinatos.
Well, that's
It's cool, but it's the same thing.
Yeah, that's Messiaen. And by the way, you brought up Messiaen. You know Anthony Jackson's bass line for Money, 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 the great funk song. Anthony's a major Messiaen guy. He talks all about getting his funk bass from Messiaen. Okay, you brought this up perfectly. My friend says the 3 T's of music are technique, theory, and taste. Technique, you've learned how to play. Theory, you know the structure. How does one acquire taste?
Well, it's difficult. Difficult to say. I mean, my taste now is that I have no trouble listening to those Magpies. I have a great deal of trouble listening to, I don't know, so-called environmental composers inflicting their environmental music on wildernesses.
Yeah. It's like my question I have to ask you, counterculturally correct. Who's better, Steve Reich or Philip Glass?
Well, both of them had an important role to play in.
But I'm saying your taste.
No, but see, it's not. It's wrapped up with what they represent, and I, to be honest, I cannot listen to either of them.
There you go. That's good.
Because every freaking documentary's got some sort of Reichian xylophone playing behind it now, and
it became mandatory.
Arpeggios are for people who need to practice.
That's
both of them are just not. They're just not interesting.
You know what Frank called that music? Looparama. Did you know that? He called it Looparama music. Well, now counterculturally correct. You're supposed to say Reich's better in Glass, just like you're supposed to say Beefheart's better in Zappa and Beckett's better in Joyce. But anyways, here we go. This is about that word taste. McLuhan said song is slowed down speech. The reason cultures have different musical taste is ultimately connected to language difference. Now you just brought up Aborigine. I'm curious your thought on that. There's two
That's
things.
the wrong word for them.
Huh?
I should say
Well,
indigenous people.
indigenous, sorry. Yeah, I said the wrong word. Okay. But here's the thing. There's two thoughts in the McLuhan line.
Showing my age.
Song is slowed down speech. The reason cultures have different musical taste is ultimately connected to language difference. I'm more so wondering your thoughts on that. The reason cultures have different musical tastes is ultimately connected to language difference. Any comment on that statement, or that percept, actually?
Well, I will just go back to something I read about the exposure of some tribes, I think they were African tribes, for the first time to the music of Bach, which in the West is considered the benchmark of something eternal and innate and sublime.
Yeah.
And which I forget, I mean, I hope I've got it right, but the response was them putting their hands over their ears at the horrible noise.
Did they really? Hands
Yes.
over ears.
Even if it's apocryphal, I think
Yeah.
it's an interesting thing. It gets back to my point about, this representing some sort of civilization.
Yeah.
It depends what you're acculturated to. Personally, as I said, I've been exposed to, because my mother was a music teacher and was a rather progressive one. I can remember not just that early memory of Wagner, but also her collection of records was pretty extraordinary. I remember Gesanga von Junglinge by Stockhausen. I used to listen to it. Terrified me so much I'd hide behind the sofa. I used to watch children's shows were much more progressive then too. Doctor Who and Space Patrol had the most extraordinary. Space Patrol was an early marionette thing like Thunderbirds.
Yeah.
It had Music Concrete soundtrack, which was the scariest shit. And you would never get away with presenting it to children these days. They're just too snowflakey, But with me, both those shows, Doctor Who, Tristram Carey, the great electronics composer, was behind a lot of the incidental music for that. And of course, the BBC Stereophonic Workshop, which the theme, I think, was written by a woman, Elizabeth somebody, who, it was an extraordinary sort of era. If you grow up with that sort of soundtrack, you lose your virginity pretty quickly. And so anything sort of diatonic, I just get so bored with.
Well, you're
as a fallback thing, because there was a trend for the music of Arvo Pärt. It's just what used to send me to sleep, for Christ's sake. I mean, we've been there, done that, and it's just it's not consoling. It's and I must tell you, I have this dreadful thing that gets me up at Halloween, where I end my life with locked-in syndrome, and I'm sent to a nursing home, and they find out I'm a musician. So they say, "Oh, look, he's a musician. He was a classical musician. Oh, look, we've got a recording of Vivaldi's Four Seasons. Let's play it." You get poor dear, he can't do anything. And I'm listening to it and I'm just dying inside. So the tear starts out of the corner. Oh, look, he's loving it so much. Turn it up.
What if they were?
That's my nightmare. Whereas it's most people's idea of a lovely piece of music. For me, it's got these associations, which
but are there exceptions?
It's like you lose because you've had so much.
A lot,
and you also know much more about the way this music comes into being.
But what if they were playing? What if they were playing Satie? Would you react the same way?
Well, see, there's another thing. There's this huge trend for Satie, who is such a radical now.
But that's what I'm saying. Would you pull back and go, "Oh, I'll make an exception. If they're playing Satie, I will cry with tears of joy," or would you still go, "Don't play that"?
It would be, don't play that, because it's like when people drag out 4 minutes 33 and think it's really radical. It's not. You do it once. You did it once. Nobody took any nothing changed. But I still think that's, one of the great pieces. But don't keep
Oh,
bringing
that's
it up.
good. I'm glad you said that, because it charted on the English pop charts. In Frank, there's a version that
You don't
Frank
need to
did.
play it anymore.
Yeah, but there's a version that Frank did on a compilation CD. Did you know that? Okay, but here's the thing about taste. Most people, I go, how do you acquire taste? They go, exposure. Now that's what most people say, experience and exposure. But the word taste implies gut feeling. Is there something, if you weren't exposed to all that music as a kid and learned that by exposure, how does one acquire, like, what's a guilty pleasure of yours? Not with all your knowledge of this contemporary experimental music, is there a guilty pleasure like space, like Corla Pandit? Have you ever listened to Corla Pandit?
No.
Frank wrote a whole song about him.
Right.
It's called Eccentrical Force.
Oh, yes. Okay.
It's about Corla Pandit, and he was a black man who disguised himself as an Indian for 60 years. He was like playing kind of Ravi Shankar as a space age bachelor pad music. Look him up. Corla Pandit, Korla Pandit. Frank wrote a whole song about him. He says Corla, he says all the lyrics are about Corla Pandit in Eccentrical Force. So anyways,
I mean, you talk about guilty pleasures. My guilty pleasure
is what?
Doing something that I was never able to as a younger person, and that is watch Netflix. Because I was too busy working. But I tell you, one of the most fascinating things I find is the marrying of image with sound. That there is some really very interesting stuff happening. One of the standouts for me was a film actually called with an Australian director, female director, called The Power of the Dog. And I think the soundtrack was written by Johnny Greenwood, who was from Radiohead.
Yeah.
And one theme stood out for me. He kept doing things in that soundtrack that were wrong. He also was channeling Penderecki, so it's sort of my ears pricked up. But there was one recording technique which stood out for me, and it was this sort of like fanfare type French horn sound in a cathedral, married with a very close-up mic'd string pizzicato. So something that's impossible in the real world, but something that's possible in a studio to represent psychologically. I recommend that film for that reason, the psychological impact of the music. Another one was recently was Copenhagen Cowboy, where there was this extraordinary scene where the protagonists, it's a very slight female alien, is face contorts, and the background is a similar ring oscillation on a single sort of synthesizer, which is married to the facial expression changing. And the combination of the two, heard or seen independently, you just think it was ridiculous, but the combination of it, or boring, and the combination of the two, utterly extraordinary. And these are things which are my guilty pleasure because they're in the popular domain. Even the soundtrack to things like Breaking Bad or Fargo or those sorts of things. I love listening to the way there's something really, because there's so much money chucked at it, there's something really creative happening in the music, where there's
in the contemporary TV movie soundtrack world.
That's where the game is. It's on the small screen.
That's funny because my friend Khalil Sabah, who's one of my oldest Zappa friends, I met him on the Zappa hotline. He was able, on a telephone call, his friend was on a catering set with John Williams, who's about to probably win another fucking Oscar for another soundtrack. And he said, "Hey, Mr. Williams, what do you think of Frank Zappa's orchestral music?" He should have just said Frank Zappa's music, but he said Frank's, and John Williams goes, "Important." So
Well, that's
isn't that
very decent
great?
of him.
We
Mm.
got that documented. But here's
Yeah.
a couple. Yeah, not in the. I'm glad you brought up this movie music thing. Now these guys are in all movie music. I'm just going to ask you a couple composers' names. Just give me a basic thumbs up or thumbs down or because I'm so glad you said that about Reich and Philip Glass. Beautiful statement. Okay, Nina
Who am I?
wrote, huh? No,
Who am I to say that?
you know a
I
lot.
mean, they're so successful. I met Steve Reich. He's a very nice chap.
Yeah.
Um,
Any
but
affected B
I
part.
think they were necessary. I do
Yeah,
think they were necessary as a antidote to the PhD
yeah,
music. It was sort of like I read a book by Peter Voigt called Not Even Wrong, which questioned the string theorists' stranglehold on university, and it really made me think. There are alternative ways of thinking. I'm not sure if Peter Voigt's right either, but it's
yeah.
a similar thing. Musically, you do need something that's just short-circuiting the disappearing up one's own arse that tends to happen when
Right.
you're in an ivory tower situation. So I think
Yeah,
but
it's like
personally, it doesn't grab me because, as I said, I've got a fairly high threshold of
that's what I'm
complexity.
saying. I respect that in you, Michael, and this is what's important. If you talk to a classical music person, they go, "What do you think of Zappa?" They might go, "Well, it's cause orchestral music's important." They go, "No, he made orchestral music through rock and roll." They don't know this, but anyways,
The other
figure.
thing I should say is that I actually play that music. So I believe that you can't criticize something unless you can actually play it. And
Yeah,
that's
that's what I'm saying. That's
yeah.
what I'm saying. You're knowledgeable. Just a quickie survey, fast, not long, on these composers. Just your same thing, your take, basically. Eh, or eh. Nina Rhoda. Wow. Astor Piazzolla. Wow. Hermeto Pascal. Really? I call him the Frank Zappa Brazil. Bernard Herrmann. That was great. And someone only listening to the audio of this will never know what you did. Okay, you brought up Pauline Oliveros. I talked to her about Zappa once. Did you ever meet her?
No, I have total respect for her.
Okay, it's amazing. In LA Free Press in 1969, they asked Frank, "You mentioned, Frank, Pauline Oliveros' work with sound, above the audible and below, creating a mass, and you like the idea." Frank, not that it created a mass, it created something audible. It produced a some indifference tone which happened to be located within the audible frequency range. By combining something so high you couldn't hear it and something so low you couldn't hear it, it yields something in the middle that you could hear. Whether or not you liked what you hear in the middle is another question. The concept is brilliant. What's your take on Frank's talking about this some indifference tone happened to be located within the audible frequency range?
Yeah, it's a very interesting. Um, I'm trying to think of the exact terminology. Messiaen artificial resonances is a Messiaen characteristic where he constructs overtones in the actual, particularly orchestral writing. Visually, it's like the Deleuze random dot image thing, the magic eye thing, something that when you look at it with a distant view, can be seen as a three-dimensional thing that jumps out at you from just random dots in the background. I think that's what he's referring to. Sometimes when you're close to, say, a glockenspiel, you'll hear, as it's being played, you'll hear notes that are down underneath the actual pitch that's being played because it's so high and penetrating. Recorders, etc. Awful instruments played by children.
You mean, wait a minute, Michael, you mean the note doesn't exist, but our ears trick us to thinking we're hearing the note?
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's like maybe it's similar to this. I would show a film on a white wall. It's black and white. It's a video projector. The original source is black and white 35 millimeter film, but we're showing it on a DVD on a white wall. And in the black, whatever they call that moire pattern, you would see color. There's no color there, but your eye tricks you and you see color. It's sort of like the glockenspiel tricks you.
Yeah, I mean, it just is another indication of how bad our senses are.
Yeah.
We've got a compromised set of senses which are designed to be the best, best compromise through evolution. And yeah, they're sort of areas which are exploitable. The spectral composers.
Maybe it's not how bad our senses are; it's how good our senses are because we're creating something new.
Yeah, you can look at it. You can look at it like that.
Yeah, how bad our senses are.
It's like with a lot of our perceptions, they're a delusion, aren't they?
Okay, is perception reality?
Oh God, I don't think our perception is, but I do think there is reality. I'm with what's her name, Sabine Hossenfelder. I think she's great, but I can't argue for it because I'm not intelligent enough. But
that's
it gets back to, you read their opinions again, like the opposite of her would be Don Hoffman about reality, and I just think it makes more sense what a physicist would say is reality. And having done a little bit of philosophy, I just remember David Hume about metaphysics, and he just said, commend it to the flames. And I don't think anybody's come up with a better response than that.
He said, what do you commit to the flames?
Any metaphysics, the whole area.
You mean, he says, burn metaphysics, commit it to the flame? Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't know how much, he's a bit of a racist. I don't know how much we can.
Okay. Now,
he's a problematic person.
Yeah. But Lily Tomlin said, reality is just a collective hunch.
She's a lot more successful than me.
Okay. Leonard Cohen said the only way you can sell a concert is if you put yourself at risk. And if you don't do that, people know. What role does risk take in your creative process?
Gosh, that's a good quote. It used to take a lot of my time. I'll let you into a secret. When I was doing that Pasadena contest, which I didn't really want to do, it happened to be advertised as the world's richest piano competition because Ivo Pogorelic, who was the pianist who set it up, wanted to equate piano recitals with golf tournaments. And so there was a lot of money at stake, and I thought there's no way with my repertoire. I came in with a whole bunch of contemporary stuff, Elliott Carter and sequenza of Berio and some modern Australian stuff. And I thought, well, I know I'm not going to get anywhere. So this is the antithesis. But all I wanted to do was meet Frank Zappa before he died. And so risk-taking, I felt completely free. I was the dark horse. Nobody took any notice of me. They thought I was a bit of a joke because I was from Australia. I got a moniker of being the Crocodile Dundee of the competition. But so it freed me up as a player. There was one set work, and it was a Bach suite. And the thing about playing Bach on the piano is you're supposed to make sure that there's no pedal because it destroys the counterpoint. Well, what the hell are you playing Bach on a piano for anyway in the first place? This is what I got from Glenn Gould. He insisted on playing Bach on a piano to go against all the harpsichordists who were recording his music at the time. So my idea was just to totally destroy this Bach suite by keeping the sustaining pedal down, thereby making this huge mush of sound. But the feedback I got through that test round because I thought it was the most extraordinary thing. Nobody thought of doing that before. What, destroying an entire Bach suite, but it's leaving the sustaining pedal on. And then a bit further on, I had to play, which I think is on the web, a piece of Messiaen. And I was having trouble with the piano. And this piece, Canto Gea, I played. And there was a low chord, because I hate Steinways because they're always really fuzzy and incoherent in the bass. I like the Jap pianos. And so the only way to get a big enough sound out of this climactic chord was to actually stand up and karate chop the bloody thing, right? So wow. I stood up in the middle of this piece and karate chopped it and stood there for a while as the sound disintegrated. And what happened was that all the other pianists started copying me and standing up in the middle of their Haydn sonatas, which just doesn't work. But for me, it was because I had to get a sound out of this bloody thing, and that was the only way I could do it. So risk used to be, I mean, there are two examples I can think of at the top of my head. I used to bore audiences by playing like hugely long piano recitals and all that sort of thing too, which I guess is some sort of a risk, but I think I ended up feeling that it was just a lack of imagination. It's like the idea that you must go and record the complete piano works of such and such. There's no imagination in that at all, and it's boring. So I've become more and more backed into a corner about what's risky and convinced that the most risky thing I can do is to present my own music, which is why I was so worried about my latest effort and sent it to that British composer for his feedback. So risk for me is very much a part of the curiosity thing, and that's really again something that I saw in Zappa, that his riskiness of his lyrics, you know, a song like Dumb All Over, I mean, talk about risk in that, his risk in putting himself in front of the US Congress, those acts of courage, which on an everyday basis he must have had in the early days of presenting black musicians in white clubs, etc.
That was really good. You covered it so well, Michael. But I want to review back on December 93. The day Frank died, you won that competition?
Yeah. So I was very sad.
But the entire of the whole thing, you won it. The golf.
I tied for first place because
that's good.
That's
amazing. So I congratulate you. So this is a follow-up question. I was going to say, what does courage mean to you now? But you brought up the word courage. Viola Spolin invented something we talked about earlier, comedy improv. She was a social worker in Chicago, and she was doing role-playing exercises, and it eventually led to her spawning the Groundlings, Saturday Night Live, all this comedy improv. And she said, if the audience cannot see your struggle to achieve something, they cannot root for you to achieve it. What role does struggle play in your creative process?
Oh, it's all struggle. It's very hard. And that what I do for relaxation is practice difficult music.
Yeah.
Because writing music is incredibly taxing.
Yeah.
I saw briefly a comment by Billy Joel that he was going back into the studio to write a new song and how difficult it was for him. And I had great sympathy for him because it is difficult. It's a luxury to be able to do it, so it's a privilege to be able to do it. But it's nevertheless, it's very lonely, and it's probably why I'm talking too much. But it's not a heroic sort of thing at all. It's just a very hard slog. I don't know if you've ever seen. Have you seen any of those Dave Chappelle specials on Netflix?
Haven't really watched him. Know a little about him. Tell me what you're gonna.
He's very polarizing, but I thought I'd just watch it simply because I hadn't really watched any of his more recent stuff, and he came up. There's one he does in Austin, Texas.
Yep.
And it looks like it's a predominantly white audience. And I mean, if you can handle, he's pretty foul-mouthed.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of scatological humor, but the stories he tells of being thrown a banana peel by somebody are really handled in a very I don't know, a very brave sort of way where he just laughs at it. And yeah, there's something very courageous, I think, about his stance. It's a bit again, it's a bit like Zappa. Could be just perceived as misogynist in some respects, but yeah, I was fascinated by the way that he could turn this audience around. A lot of them were quite hostile at one stage.
Yeah, well, that's.
I think that is a very, very difficult area, stand-up comedy.
Right, but it's perfect. Well, perfect, Michael, because you have been a performer. You performed in Pasadena, and you performed your whole career besides composing. Mm-hmm. This is Ruth Draper. The key is to bring the audience up onto the stage and into the scene with you. It is they who must give you even more than you give them in the way of imagination and creative power. That sounds good. She's very articulate, but how do you do that?
Look, I have reviews from the States which say that I'm a very polarizing performer because I really don't give a damn about the audience, and I don't really want or need their approval. I have a responsibility when I'm playing other people's music to get it across in the best way that I think I can. And it's always a compromise, and it's always never as good as it could be. I understand why Zappa wanted to rehearse so much. You can rehearse and rehearse and rehearse, and it's never right. That's one of the frustrations with performance. Being a piano player, you've got this instrument to concentrate on, so you're not directly eyeballing the audience as a singer might, or and that's a good thing as far as I'm concerned, because I would then have to read the audience and see. I can feel the audience, and the best thing for me is to feel them hostile about my attitude or about the music I'm playing, and then for them gradually to fall silent. And the best thing for me is to have an absolutely silent audience, because whatever I'm doing is being concentrated on.
By them. Yeah, that's like, the whole Keith Jarrett thing. If you cough, he stops the show and goes, "Who coughed?" He'll get pissed.
I won't do that. I mean, I have. Yeah. I mean, I've done concerts.
I'm not saying you would do that.
Concerts where I've completely cleared the hall, and I'm not saying I'm successful, or anything like that, or that I'm the great role model. But it's not my primary thing that I want to communicate.
No, I
What I
understand.
want to communicate is, like, for instance, if I played
Yeah.
Zappa, I want to say this is a serious,
Yeah.
amazing composition.
Yeah.
You sit there and you pay homage to this
Yeah.
music. It's not me. It's
Yeah.
this composer, and that's my attitude with every composer. With my own stuff, I'm more vulnerable,
Yeah.
and of course, I'm more deferential about it. But often it's written, or it used to be written anyway, because there was no other music I could find to actually fill something. So it was written from a totally pragmatic point of view, as a contrast or as a part of a structure. I always had an idea that the concert was a artwork as a whole, as a Gesamtkunstwerk,
Great.
and so everything that you did, every moment, was there for a reason. It wasn't just trotted out because that was the thing that you could fling together at the last minute.
That's Frank's complete thing.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
the total theater. I was
total artwork. Yeah.
I can't say that word. I always say it's gefilte fish.
Gesamtkunstwerk.
Okay, here's Ben Ratliff, jazz music writer. I mean sound as it has long functioned among jazz players as a mystical term of art, as in every musician finally needs a sound, a full and sensible embodiment of their artistic personality, such that it can be heard at best in a single note. So me and you can hear Miles Davis. We go, oh, that's Miles. Couple notes. Ben said he's fragile and pointed. So it's condensing your sound into 2 words. He says Coltrane, slightly undercooked and urgent. If a music writer that you really respected was going to summarize Michael's sound in 2 words, what 2 words would you go? He got me.
What are we talking about? We talking about my actual music or my playing?
You put in the context you want. He puts it in sound, as in every musician needs a sound, a full and sensible embodiment of our artistic personality. So you could say it as you're playing or as your composition or as you're recording, whatever you want. But just saying Michael's music is these 2 words. What would you go? Oh, they got me. I think that I will agree with those 2 words.
Well, looking back on my life in my 62nd year, I would say that the 2 words are always polarizing.
Always polarizing. That is beautiful. Now, what 2 words do you think would apply to Frank that you would like? Oh, they got Frank.
Oh, similar.
Similar. Very good.
I cannot compare to Frank.
Okay, now tell me an instrumental that makes you laugh.
An instrumental?
Yeah.
Oh, Spike Jones, Tchaikovsky.
No, but Spike Jones is known as a vocal guy. I mean, someone who's not, I mean, there are a few Spike Jones instrumentals, but he's mainly known as a vocal guy. Okay, besides Spike Jones, someone who makes an instrumental that makes you laugh.
Oh, my favorite orchestra. Thus Spake Zarathustra by the Portsmouth Symphonia.
Yeah. Symphonia. I know those guys. What's the first word of their band?
Portsmouth.
How do you spell it?
P-O-R-T.
P-O-R-T.
S-M-O-U-T-H. Mouth.
Okay. Yeah. That's good. You answered it well. What's more fundamental, music or language?
I think music.
Thelonious Monk said there are no wrong notes. Any comment?
He was living in a different age.
Very good. Keneally said, yeah, there's no wrong notes for Thelonious Monk. He was living in a different age. You really put it into context well. My friend said a great thing. He said, Monk heard all the notes Charlie Parker heard, but only decided to play some of them.
Yeah.
Isn't that a great way? And this is, Monk said, silence is the loudest sound in the universe. Miles Davis talked about the space between notes. George Clinton, Parliament Funkadelic, said, funk is the absence of. How do you know not to play? How do you incorporate silence in your composition? What's the process of knowing not playing?
There is this is really interesting because I don't generally abide silence in the composition itself. The silence is contextual.
Yeah.
So I use silence as framing, but I don't generally use it for extended periods, because the piano is, and I'm generally writing for the piano. I use it in my instrumental writing, depending on the nature of the instrument. But as a lot of my music is keyboard based, it's, as Busoni said, it's a short voiced instrument anyway. So silence is built in to the actual, xylophone with pedals, which is a piano. So it's a sort of way that you define silence, which there's really no such thing. It's a philosophical concept, which, Miles Davis is right, because he's coming at it from an improviser's point of view. I'm generally coming at it from a distilled composition point of view. So the use of silence is something that is premeditated. It's actually put into the score. So it's it's not doing the same thing as choosing not to play, for instance.
Choosing not, that's a good distinguishing. I appreciate that, Michael. But did you say Bersani as in Leo Bersani? Who was that you were referring to?
Busoni.
How do you spell it?
Ferruccio Busoni, the Italian German, Busoni.
Okay, thank you. Now,
funny, they've got a Busoni festival in Italy, but his music's not as popular as it used to be.
Yeah.
But he wrote one of the great treatises, one of the three aesthetics on music, and he was a great devotee of Liszt, and he had a great influence on Debussy and on 20th century music.
Yeah, great. So here is Copland, 4 elements of music: melody, harmony, rhythm, and tone color. In non-academic terms, to the normal person on the street, what is tone color?
It's the taste of a sound.
The taste of the sound. Wow, that's back to that taste word. Now, how do you integrate focus on those four elements: melody, harmony, rhythm, and tone color. Is there a process? Are they all equally going, or are you more of this kind of person, or you start with this? Maybe just talk about how you integrate those four elements.
Well, I'd say apart from the color, what was the last one? Tone, wasn't it?
Melody, harmony, rhythm, and tone color.
Yeah, it's tone color.
Yeah.
Yes, there are, like the last one, I don't know if you're aware of Schoenberg's Farben from his 5 orchestral pieces, but that's totally dedicated to tone color, shifting between instruments, etc. It's something which is difficult to replicate on a piano, but it is the type of sound is possible to manipulate the tone of sounds on a piano. You can use pedals or attack, and it's really it's really where you can be the most creative, because the other aspects are often the ones which are much more we have accepted parameters where you've got to play the right notes. So yes, I think tone is one of the areas which you can. What was the question?
How do you integrate those tone color, melody, harmony, and rhythm?
Yeah, I think the latter like tone comes out of those other three aspects.
Yeah.
And I mentioned the Schoenberg because that seemed to be where he's operating from the other way around. So he's reverse engineering, starting with tone, quite deliberately.
Yeah.
Messiaen was again one of the great atomizers of music, and in his 4 rhythmic etudes of 1949, sort of which he wrote again for piano, the aspect of tone, color, etc., and those other aspects are really serialized. So he enabled music to become sort of digital through those etudes. They were consciously looking at the elements, atomization of music down to those sorts of elements.
What's more important, conviction or compromise?
I'd have to say conviction.
In your accomplishments, what played the biggest role, second and third? Skill, luck, and ambition. How do you rate those 3 things in your accomplishments?
I would have to say luck first, followed by skill. What was the third one?
Ambition.
Yeah. Yes, ambition is related to competition in my mind, which isn't one of my. I don't like competitions. I happen to win one at the same time as detesting them as the worst thing, in the world. And my life's been trying to come to terms with that. And for art, it's the ambition. It lies in self development, as evidenced by somebody like, again, Zappa, who just continually educated himself and was constantly curious. If that's ambition, I don't know. I think it's more curiosity.
Curiosity. Well, you anticipated this, Michael. There's a line that goes, "You create what you resist." Bob Goldthwait, the comedian who was a Zappa fan, said, "You are what you hate." James Joyce said, "It's a curious thing how your mind is super saturated with the religion in which you say you disbelieve." And Louis Buñuel nailed it. He said, "Thank God I'm an atheist." So what's your thought on that? It almost crosses over from your last statement. You create what you resist. I'm not saying you, Michael, but one creates what one resists. Any thought on that line?
By the way, before I answer that, I heard you on the BBC talking about your James Joyce book club, and it was fantastic.
Yeah,
what an amazing concept.
Thank you. Well,
Yeah,
T.S. Eliot started it in 47. No, in 1929, James Joyce created the first Finnegan's Wake reading club, 10 years before the book came out, with all these big hotshot artists like Samuel Beckett. Then in 47, 8 years or, whatever, few years after the book came out, then T.S. Eliot started a reading club. So it's nothing. I didn't do anything new. Finnegan's Wake reading clubs have been around for years,
Right. Yeah, but still, I mean,
it's
the idea. It's the idea of that. So your example, I think, is just wonderful to sort of dive deeply into a work of art like that. What was the question? Because it is related.
Yeah. It's you create what you resist, or one creates what one resists. Any thoughts on that line?
Yeah, well, I think similar to Joyce, there was a sort of contrariness about him writing such a piece, wasn't there? That it took him a very long time and at great personal cost, I believe. And my experience as a musician, but also growing up in a particularly very staunch religious environment, has shaped the way I think and the way I've gone artistically. That's for sure. And so you sort of need that symbiotic relationship. As something to create a better life for yourself, which is, I guess, what I'm doing at the moment. Even though it's very, I've withdrawn a lot from what one would consider as a normal musical life, but I've done that. Things have shaped me, like climate catastrophe has shaped me. I'm not traveling anymore, and I'm not interested in a career if it involves that. And unfortunately, most musicians have been painted into a corner that's all that's left after these freaking streaming people and major organizations have taken away all the income streams from everything else. And so that's part of my task at the moment, is trying to work out how to operate now after COVID and everything else. And I'm not sure it's right what I'm doing, and I don't care if I lose my profile, if I lose. I'm grateful to talk to you, and I'm sorry to sound like a loser, but I'm prepared to be a loser rather than contribute to that problem. That's my only way forward, and that's shaped some decisions. I can see it's still working.
Well, it's funny because Moshe Feldenkrais says it's literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength, rather than we're usually taught to overcome a weakness. Tell me a weakness you turned into a strength.
Well, I have to say, giving up alcohol, which I did 20 years ago, has changed my brain in a way that's very difficult. I think if people are thinking about giving up alcohol or any drug, really, they don't tell you about the enormous. William Styrone is the only one that talks about the In Darkness Visible, talks about the journey through that the brain has to take recalibrate, and it takes decades, and it's really, really hard. And you find your life altering. You have to change your friends. You have to change your family. You have to change absolutely everything, particularly if you don't believe in the sort of Pollyanna-ish higher power that the Alcoholics Anonymous people foist on you. I'd never go to one of their meetings. You have to do it on your own. And that sort of thing, I think, has turned me into a much more self-sufficient person. But it's incredibly difficult. I wouldn't say it's easy. Does that answer your question?
It did answer it. Well, thank you for being so honest. It's beautiful, and I appreciate all this. And here's a question we sort of touched on, and I'm curious. The two questions are: is archiving more innate or more invented, and do you have plans for your own archive? But it sets it up. By setting it up, it will go into a little, because you do practice yoga. Is that correct?
Hmm.
Yeah. And so about these Eastern philosophies. The word archive came from 1400s, to keep safe, free from harm. 200 years later, it's what we think of an archive. Records preserved as evidence. Why do humans have to keep stuff when the whole point of life is to live in the moment? Isn't that what we talk about? Music is being present in the moment. Be here now, Ram Dass. In fact, Wyndham Lewis said, artists live in the present and write a detailed history of the future. And, I love the futurists. They say destroy all libraries and museums, but I love libraries. I go to a library every day. But I like that they said that. And so, the Egyptians kept stuff in their coffin with them. I just learned from asking this question a week ago that it's in the Bible, or some religions, people said we bury our dead under our houses because we want that spirit to come into us, like there's some crossover. So is this need or want to archive more innate or more invented?
Well, as I said before, I think it's very convenient to have particularly all your digitized information in one place to be sucked up in a couple of seconds by an AI of the future. I think it's stupid that we are so obsessed with archiving. I've done recordings and I've published works. Why have I done that? Why haven't I just improvised stuff and allowed it to go into the atmosphere? I arrogantly think I'd like to have something to look at the end of my life, to say it wasn't, I don't know, it's just disappeared. But ultimately, like the Library of Alexandria, it can be destroyed. It can be made to vanish. And many people have said, it's probably a good thing if humans disappear from the planet for the sake of the planet. So our obsession with gathering stuff, hoarding information, is probably a symptom of our deep fear of death.
Yeah.
Again.
Fear of death. Can you forget to die?
Sometimes when I'm talking to my wife.
That's good.
She still does that to me. I guess that's why I love her.
Oh, how many years you been together?
20.
How do you explain the longevity?
Practice marriage.
If you were walking down the street today and you met yourself as a 12-year-old, what would you say to your 12-year-old self?
You'll survive till you're 62.
How do you find peace of mind?
I must say I run.
Yeah. 5 quick Alan Watts questions off the top of your head in just a couple words. 1, who started it all?
It didn't start.
It did not start? That's a good. I've never had that answer, Michael. Thank you. 2, are we going to make it?
Who cares?
Very good. Where do we put it?
Pass.
Who's cleaning it up?
No one.
Last one. Is it serious?
It's beyond serious.
Beyond serious. That's funny. That's Zappa. Frank said, I'm very serious about being not serious. And then he also said an amazing question I've never heard. What is beyond love? We're all trying to get love, but what is beyond love? What an amazing question. Okay, a few more and we're out of here. You've broken the world's record for the most fun I've ever had in one of these.
Oh, that's a great compliment. Thank you.
Oh, I mean it. It's been.
So much, Gerry.
I'm
I'm so privileged you've taken time out of your busy schedule. I don't know how you.
Yeah, but here's the thing.
You do.
I usually now go this. I calculate it, and if we can do 2 parts, But for some reason, I felt that we were flowing and we didn't have to do a second part like 4 or 5 months down the road. So I appreciate you hanging in there and never going, dude, I gotta go, or So if wait, did I ask you this? If you were walking down the street and you met yourself, yeah, I asked you that. Okay, which way should toilet paper come off the roll, over or under?
Just as long as it's unstuck.
If a publisher was to release your autobiography off the top of your head, what would the title be?
Won't ever happen.
If they want to put your book out and they want to scent the glue in the binding, what smell?
It'll be an ebook, surely.
It will be a what?
An ebook, surely.
Oh, it'll be an ebook. No smell. Oh, no one's ever said that. An ebook.
Well, my wife bringing it out, but you said autobiography. If it was a biography, she'd title it "You're Too Loud."
You're too loud. And what smell would she want the glue to be?
Oh, probably lavender.
Very good. If a statue was built in your honor, where would you want it displayed and what would it be made of?
Actually, arrogantly, I would say in Lithuania next to Frank's.
Nice. And what would you want it made of?
Wax.
Tell me something good you never had and you never want.
A Ferrari.
If you were in a vat of vomit up to your neck and someone threw a bag of shit at your face, what would you do?
Just cop it.
What's the cultural shift you see developing today that inspires you?
School children.
Yeah.
Following Greta.
School children doing what?
Following Greta.
Oh, following Greta. Yeah, that's a great one. I agree. What's a question that remains unresolved for you?
I don't know whether I can say it. It's a bit personal.
It's good. I like that. Okay, now, Michael, how has playing music, composing music shaped your behavior?
It's made me very opinionated, and you know, I said always polarizing before, and I've sort of come to accept that because I care about it too much.
Yeah. The same question about Zappa. How has Frank Zappa shaped your behavior? Listening to him, studying his music.
He's made me choose the difficult path. All the time.
It made me choose the difficult
Path.
Oh, path. Okay. So, yeah.
Path. Yeah.
All the time.
Mm.
That's amazing. Thornton Wilder said in 1928, art is confession. Art is the secret told, but art is not only the desire to tell one's secret, it's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time. You've laid your cards on the table for over 3 hours. I'm not insinuating you haven't already answered this. What's it really all about for you?
Well, it's a code. I think he's quite right. And you can hide behind it at the same time as being completely open. I can say things musically, even when you make a decision to play a certain type of music, it's a political decision. Yeah. And yeah.
Amazing. It's really beautiful what you said. By the way, I forgot to tell you a cute line when we were talking about archiving. Tom Waits said, "The best music doesn't want to be recorded." Isn't that a great?
Well, he's, I mean, what a guy. Yeah. I mean, he's singer-songwriting, I got to be honest with you, is not my thing.
Yeah.
With Zappa, it was always his instrumental stuff. It was always the George Duke solos.
Yeah.
It was always the stuff that wasn't said that I really reacted to. But I found it helpful because he was dealing with subjects that nobody else was really dealing with, which I appreciated at the time because, as I said, you couldn't get information otherwise. Tom Waits, so much of his persona is wrapped up in, and his music is wrapped up intrinsically with his voice type, even the instrumentation he chooses, etc. And yeah, I've never really, because he's predominantly a singer. That's the thing. I haven't really got into him so much.
But it is.
He's very clever. I've got to say, it's a bit like Bob Dylan. Yeah, it's I don't musically nothing, but obviously literature-wise extremely valuable. They've got the same sort of quality as Raymond Carver, but it's for me, it was always what's happening musically that's driven me.
Yeah.
I mean, to part with money to buy something. Yeah.
But it's interesting because Tom Waits saying the best music doesn't want to be recorded is very interesting concept, because we never lived in an era where there wasn't music recording. Because the question I forgot to ask you was, what was the motive of the cave artist? So, what was the motive of the cave artists, the cave dancers, and the cave musicians? We don't have records of the dance or the music, but we do have records of the cave art. Your guess or your hunch, what was their motive?
Well, I recommend to you a book which was recommended to me by Arjun called The Recording Angel. I forget who the writer was, but it's
Yeah, I can look it up. Yeah.
it's looking at the phenomenon of recording, how it changed music. And I think Waits is quite right, because prior to that, we got no idea how people played,
Yeah.
and what they sounded like, and the degree of professionalism or right notes or whatever. I mean, I suspect that the first performances of Beethoven's symphonies were just fucking atrocious, but nobody can sort of say that. And people at that time also, this whole sort of authentic music reproduction stuff is bullshit, because
Yeah.
you can't recreate those conditions, and you can't recreate the fact that audiences, if they were allowed to go to any of these performances, which they probably weren't because they weren't aristocrats, would only hear something once. So what sort of impression are you going to get? And if you read music criticism of first performances, the people are saying how, I don't know, discordant Debussy's or Pelléas and Melisande was, music, or La Mer of Ravel. And we look at it now as something incredibly soothing.
Yeah.
And it gets back to my comments about the tribes listening to Bach for the first time and thinking it was hideous noise. We've got no idea what would happen to music if we got rid of this idea that was being put under a microscope all the time and awarded prizes and Grammys and all that sort of thing. If it was just allowed to be part of people's lives as a natural thing, like breathing every day. Everybody was a musician who had that thing. You didn't have to sort of sharp elbow your way into some sort of business to be identified as a musician. I identify as a musician, and I do it even though COVID, which took away the music business for me, seemed like the end of it all. All congregational stuff seemed to be over by then. And so, I mean, I even did a philosophy degree, or started it, because I just thought there's no way out of this. But I came back to music because that's what I do.
Yeah.
And it's like, if there was more of that it's part of, the education. It's not a luxury in the education system. It's something necessary for people. The creative arts were something that was regarded as important as food and drink, and exercise. We get over this sort of quantifying of it all the time, and it would change. And Waits is right, because that's the way you get through life, is by interpreting it through such things, or through art, or through the places you live in, or the way you treat other human beings. It's like that's what the significance of what he's saying is. And I said before, about recordings when they first came out, how different, just piano sounds, let alone other instruments, sounded, and how they were sort of all put into this stricture of conformity, if you read the Recording Angel, by the 20th century. So now everything's converged. Pianos have all diverged into becoming exactly the same as a Steinway, because they were the first people to go and put pianos in all the concert halls throughout the world. So that's the model. We had a wonderful piano called the Stewart piano, which was like some sort of evolution of the piano, which failed. It was like the DeLorean, because it failed because some pianists were acculturated for this type of instrument, which is the Steinway. Every other brand that's successful has to imitate the Steinway, otherwise a pianist won't play it. And you look at cars; they're all sort of devolving, into the same SUV or the same, Tesla, whatever. because that's, Michael Serres talks about parasite. It's this parasite mentality,
Yeah.
where the instant an idea is developed, it's immediately parasitized. That's how capitalism works. The artist is somebody, I forget who you mentioned before, but the person I was thinking of was Colin Wilson, who, before he went mad, wrote a book called The Outsider, which is not like Camus' Outsider, but The Outsider is about the artist as the dynamo of society, and it's basically a survey of all different artists and thinkers who all exist by inventing their own lives, like Zappa did, living their life as an artwork and thinking, and thereby acting as the true dynamo of the society, not the corporation. So I still think that's something which Waits is trying to say about music. Yeah.
What is Parasite? Is Michael? How do you spell his last name?
He's French. Serres.
Thank you. I would love to read that, because you brought up George Duke earlier, and and you like his solos, and what an amazing soloist. I agree, and it's fun. I wish you could come to Venice someday, because you can run into Tommy Mars watching the sunset on his bike and just start talking about composing with Frank and his time with Frank, and it's really precious.
So lucky to have lived in that era, hey?
He's an amazing guy, and it's like Tommy and George Duke. Frank's had so many great pianists and keyboardists, and one thing I loved about George when you said his solo is he quotes Shortening Bread in the middle of, I think it's Redunzel, and it just gets me every moment. And then he also quotes Monk, and I think on Roxy.
That's the thing that I most appreciate. I mean, I tend to be melancholy and serious all the time, but the thing about Zappa is the humor in his music.
Yeah.
And that's something that's needed more than ever. And I think really that's the modern rock star is the stand-up comedian. I think that's really basically what I mean. Zappa was doing that with his stage shows. Let's face it; it was very, very funny.
And he came out of.
He recognized that aspect. We play music, we don't work music, and
that's it. It's a main thing.
I think that's something.
He, with The Alchemist, he satirized his own new invention. He put theater and rock together and came up with a new thing, and then he satirized his new thing. And it's funny, because I wanted to touch on that for a second, because you said it. So Frank doesn't pay or say he quotes Shortening Bread. There's no copyright, saying he had to pay, because the jazz tradition is you quote American musical songbook in the middle of your solo, Train or Miles. They're quoting these little things, and Frank quotes like crazy all over the place. And sometimes, having worked for him on Baby Snakes, we had to pay when there was a quote. Like Tommy Mars sings something in Baby Snakes, and we had to pay the publishing. And I asked Frank once, in the middle of, I think it's in Australia, in the middle of a guitar solo in like 73, you quote Richard Rodgers' Surrey with the Fringe on Top. And I says, what? He says, I listen to all that shitty music. I says, that's not shitty music. American musicals is how I learned jazz and blues, through Cole Porter and Irving Berlin and Gershwin. So, then I have this whole theory of Frank's influenced by Richard Rodgers, because he says, the wind wishing through the plains, that's in Thinkfish. That's a direct Richard Rodgers quote. And then he quotes, Isn't It Romantic, in the middle of Punky's Whip. So, he definitely had these influences, other than these ones like he acclaims Varese in, Guitar Slim and Stravinsky and whatnot. But I talked to Charlie Hayden, the great jazz bass player once, because in the middle of an Ornette Coleman song, he quotes this old Appalachian folk song. And I didn't know the title. Boom, 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 boom. I says, what's the name of that? And he goes, that's Old Joe Clark. I said, who wrote it? He goes, nobody wrote it. Which is great because music is written by somebody, but it's passed down like waters of March in Brazil. It's passed down so many times. The one who gets the writing credit is the one who claims the publishing arrangement. Because, you know, so it's like Stravinsky stealing or appropriating old folk music, or the Bulgarian Women's Choir. Like, you know this. Who wrote this stuff? Did Messiaen actually hear a bird sing it and then he claimed the writing credit?
Yeah, it's insane, isn't it? I mean, so much of what works as music is based on nostalgia, based on memory, based on working on, and you know, like in the classical era, the whole the earliest pieces were variation on, and mainly on as a form. It was something always based on something familiar, and yeah, it's just the whole copywriting of, I don't know, notes. It's going to get down to notes like colors now, isn't it?
It's
copyright middle C.
Well, I say it's basically lawyer budget that dictates it. Who's got the bigger lawyer? Who's got the bigger lawyer budget? Because I kind of fall back on Oscar Wilde. Everything's in public domain.
Yeah. And, you know, it's, I don't, I mean, for me, I do think, you know, the idea of quotation is a bit suspect. I try to avoid that. Like, so in that thing that you've listened to of mine, the 48 Fugues, there's no direct quotation at all.
Right.
Because I figure it's it's a homage. It's a genuine homage. Like, it's genuinely trying to get inside the mind of the processes of another composer, rather than you know, just serving up their ideas.
Well, you mentioned John,
which is what you do as a performer. Hopefully, is when you're presenting something by another composer, like in my area, notated music. It's about, you spend a long time in the mind of that person, and because it's notated, it's gone through this distillation process. So, and then if it's published, it's gone through further editing, further distillation, all these. So by the time you get it, it has been thought about so much that you've really got to take it seriously as a performer and try to understand all of those layers of application and work that have gone into it. This can be taken to ridiculous, you know, extents in certain areas where, you know, you've got only, you know, the authority of a score resides in Vienna or whatever, and there's this whole pompous sort of industry based on that too, where if you play differently, you know, it's not authentic type of thing. So that you can go too far that way and it loses all of its spontaneity. So somehow, you know, you can appropriate. Music has to do this. It has to stay plastic, and it has to stay beyond all of these legal strictures. It's almost like applying principles of free speech to it as well. Otherwise, you end up in a, you know, is that chord copyrighted, you know, or is that sequence of chord copyrighted, or is that silence copyrighted? Which, I mean, we've had one case of that in this country. I don't know if you've had the silence issue on a recording contested for copyright, but I mean, this is ridiculous.
It's ridiculous, but it's like Shakespeare said, "Kill all lawyers." I'm not for killing, but anyways,
Oh, no. Some of them work for refugees and stuff. No way.
Yeah, right.
It's our greed that is the
greed.
problem.
Yeah,
yeah. The greed.
But it's also what you brought up really reminded me of one of my favorite Zappa wannabes, John Zorn, who you mentioned in one of your interviews, in his tribute album to Morricone, The Big Gun Down. I mean, that thing is hilarious because it really captures a feel, which is Zorn came out of Ornette a lot. And Ornette had a tribute that John Zorn held for him, like some big hall in New York, where all these people played the Ornette notes. So they said to Ornette, "Do you want to join in?" And Ornette sat on the side of the stage and played all not the notes, which I thought was perfect. He's like, "Okay, you guys go play my notes, but I'm going to go play something else because I want to constantly make this music go farther. I don't want, it's my problem with Zappa cover bands, and I've seen them since he died and Zappa's universe before he died. And the basic thing is like, yeah, like Warren Cucurullo says in Baby Snakes, there's notes involved. Well, there's notes involved, but it's the feeling, like you were talking about, of getting that atmosphere, that environment, that resonating interval that is what Frank was about, and not just taking it too seriously, but having the playfulness and not worrying if you get a few notes wrong, that you're trying to get the gist of what Frank was communicating with his music. And it's hard because Frank was it's back to your breakdown of spontaneity and rigor.
Yep. And also, I think there's a difference between doing something for the first time, and then, somebody then jumping on board. And, once you see, this is where Parasite is sort of interesting, in terms of our culture wanting to parasitize the originator all the time. It's much more difficult to come up with something for the first time, and that's where the struggle is. And that's something that we you instantly become the product, don't you? Once that happens to your music, there's this sort of power thing that comes in at that stage, also about, oh, okay, well, Dweezil's band does the best Zappa covers because he's his son, type of thing. There's that authority, and mind you, it's bloody good, especially when Terry Bozzio comes on. But it isn't the same as the original, and it shouldn't be the same as the original. That shouldn't be the aspect of what is going on. It's a celebration, rather, which I think they do capture, of the, this is somebody who's got firsthand experience of the music, and I guess has the imprimatur to do it. But it is it's
well, I just experienced Stinkfoot Orchestra and sort of opened for them last week and did an hour lecture about Zappa in Venice before they played in a local club. And they're a 14-piece orchestra that really tackles Frank well. And just check them out with Napoleon. Their three vocalists who have sung with them are Ike, Willis, Ray White, and Napoleon. And Napoleon sang with this band. And all three of these black vocalists of Frank's have complimented, like, this is one of the best Zappa cover bands. And they have that playfulness, and they have that that whole environment, like we're having fun, you know. And I've seen Dweezil for 15 years, and he's about to start touring again with the Roxy and Apostrophe albums, playing them mainly, which is great. But it's a little too much. We got to get the notes right, and they don't play. You know, Sheila's played with them for all 15 years, and she adds a feeling of playfulness. But it's, you know, and I love what he's doing, and I'm happy for him. But it just doesn't. It's a little too not playful. It's hard to play Frank and get the playfulness and the spontaneity and the rigor. And then if Trump says something that day, it's in the show that night. You know, that was very important with Frank. He was like he said on that Dinah Shore, I'm a documentary reporter. You know, so he's commentating on our time, living in the present, you know. And it's difficult to do that because Steely Dan used to open for Frank, and they went backstage and says, dude, we have to play all the notes on our album. You don't. Why? And he says, I don't wanna. Now, I don't know. I've never talked to them, but are they playing the notes on their album because their record company said, play it like it's on your album, then you'll sell more records? Or was it their choice to sound accurate? Because you know, the two bands Zappa people kind of liked in doing the Zappa hotline for a year was Steely Dan and Weather Report. And it's like, you know, now Weather Report's
it's so interesting to me because that pressure, that commercial pressure to deliver to an audience, what the audience heard, and if it's not exactly the same, this is precisely the problem with classical music. It's the same problem, and Zappa's quite right. Blow it up, because that's where music happens.
That's it. That's where
it's not a routine. And I think, you know, I mean, I got the DVD of Dweezil's band, and I must say that it's track 13 where Terry Bozzio comes on and does Punky. What is it?
Punky Swims.
Yeah,
to Black Page.
Sad Portland people. You know, and it's just so risky and angry and over the top. The whole show just sort of really lifted then. And yeah, it's very interesting to me to see somebody who's, you know, I feel for Dweezil being in that family. And I also feel it's the most wonderful compliment to his father. And also, so you've got to, you know, I think you've got to give him some slack for that. And I think the problem is that nobody could reproduce what Zappa did. Authentic, you know, not even authentically, but just in terms. But it's what he stood for. This humorous, playful approach and risky approach. Which is what is missing from music because of the recording industry and because of the monetization. If you see any of these extraordinary, spectacular shows, it's become more and more about that and less about the actual musical content, it seems, which for me is, you just withdraw from that because there's so much infrastructure and corporatization involved in getting something up to the level of a Taylor Swift, Beyonce, even a Kylie Minogue show, are extraordinary and they do really well. I'm not suggesting anything, but it's just there's just so much money thrown at it that you know, or Pink Floyd, spectacular. That it's an overwhelming thing for the actual musical content now. And I don't know if you've seen that Black Mirror thing of Miley Cyrus. Did you see her doing the future of music type of thing in Black Mirror?
Seen it, but tell me about it.
She's absolutely brilliant. And really it's getting to that stage with audiences interacting with holograms, etc. They have groups like that in Japan, where the audience can influence. I really wonder how Zappa would react to that, with an audience interfering with his musical ideas, as they do. I forget the name of the Japanese group, but there's a very beautiful hologram that's manufactured to react through the iPhones of the audience all the time. Fabulous band, etc. But it's to have that direct input. It's what audiences want. They want to be the performer now.
Yeah.
Whereas with Zappa, it was definitely a hierarchical thing. He was the man.
He did encourage
Teaching the audience.
he did encourage audience participation.
Yeah,
but we'll close.
He learned something from him because of his astounding musicianship. Yeah.
And it's funny because you stressed that he said go to the library and learn. It's like, yeah, you could go to a Zappa concert and learn something. So we'll close out. What an amazing time, Michael. I appreciate it. What gives you the most optimism?
Oh, I hope science. I think it's all we've got left, and I'm just rooting for him.
I missed the word. You hope. What was the next?
I'm rooting for science.
Silence. SILENCE.
Science.
Oh, science. Sorry. Science gives you the most optimism. That's amazing. I have this quote that I'll send you. I don't have it memorized, about Frank and science. Do you know the Bob Marshall interview with Frank?
No.
It's the longest interview ever with Frank.
Okay.
Or it's one of the longest, and it's online. It's transcribed. So you can't get the audio, but I was there, and it's 3.5 hours transcribed. We were with Frank for 7 hours. So you just Google Bob Marshall, Frank Zappa interview.
Okay.
And that line about science comes up. It's very interesting. And yeah, I'm always probing the difference between art and science. Is there a difference?
No. Have you read E.O. Wilson's Consilience?
No, I haven't.
It's a really good book to read about the conjunction of art and science, how necessary they are for each other.
Oh, that's beautiful. And that's Colin Wilson?
No, E.O. Wilson.
E.O. Wilson. Yes.
The entomologist.
E.O. Wilson. Thank you. Yes, I'll look that up.
He describes science as like spokes on a wheel, and then the art fills it all in.
Yeah. Art fills it in. Yeah.
Makes the connection.
Well, then this begs to ask you one bonus question, if you don't mind, because this is McLuhan just asking a question. He's not making a statement. He was more about probing with percepts than concepts. And it's, how about technologies as the collective unconscious and art as the collective unconsciousness? So he's sort of saying technology and art, that's not necessarily science and art, but that's our inventions, technology, anything we invent, from spoken word to cell phones, and then art. And he says technologies could be the collective unconscious, and art is the collective unconsciousness. Do you understand what could be possibly going on there? I never can get that. What he's saying is the difference between conscious and consciousness.
Well, I think when they're now starting to implant, you know, things in the brain,
Yeah.
directly to, you know, for medical reasons, we're really looking at the I think the final frontier of that, what that statement is about, unconscious and unconsciousness. John Ralston Saul wrote a book called The Unconscious Civilization, about us sort of wandering into the future without any sort of, you know, like you talked about before, this sort of apathy of people just accepting, like a Stockholm syndrome, the latest technology. And really that's, again, I mean, I get back to this elephant in the room, which is AI, and I just think, well, it's inevitable that it's going to happen. This bridge being taken by the new technology, because it would solve so many problems. Already they're using it to try to identify tumours and so forth. So for medical reasons alone, let alone reasons of warfare, which is the obvious application and the one that will probably be the most efficient at developing the autonomous, you know, killer robots. So for a brief while, I was part of the that organisation against killer robots, which sounds balmy, but it was mainly scientists. These questions are coming to a sharp bottleneck in our lifetime. I didn't think it would happen, but I don't know what it means, the difference between unconscious and unconsciousness, except one seems like an entity and one is like a state of things. But McLuhan was gnomic in a lot of these statements, and he might have just been thinking of something else, although I'm pretty sure he was aware of where all the technology was heading, and driven by things which we desire. That's the thing that's driving all of this. And I watched a very interesting debate which was left open-ended on the ethics of AI in medicine, and then what have you, and it was just left open-ended. Of course, you don't want somebody to suffer if there's a solution, but at the same time, you open that box for bad actors, and particularly bad actors who don't care about the consequences, which are what we're facing. And that, I don't know how you protect against that. Do you?
Well, it's everything humans invent have services and disservices, and it's how we flip the disservice into a service. Because once humans invent something, we're not going to get rid of it. It's how we're going to deal with it. And so that's why Marshall said technology is the most human thing. So we extend our mind, like you said. What does a piano extend your mind? We extend our mind through this piano. There's a flip to all this, and it goes back to Messiaen. Then there's biomimicry, and we didn't invent the mirror, really. We invented this thing that a river or a pond of water does. Water can be a mirror, and we look at it and we go, well, we need to invent one of those. So then we just invent cell phones and go, now I carry around my mirror. You know, and so if everything we invent extends some humanness, then how could any invention be completely bad? See, there are services to AI, but you want to know, how are we going to deal with the disservices? How can we navigate the disservices and flip them into a service? You know, like Frank didn't like the unions, because he would end up in a hockey arena to play a rock and roll show, and these union guys will go, "You can't move that." And it's like, "Hey man, I got my crew, we can move it." And so he knew that there were services to unions. They started in my hometown, Flint, Michigan, in 1934, where they got rights for the worker. Good.
Yep.
But then over the years, it got corrupt. But
that's the sort of entrepreneurial side of Zappa, isn't it?
Yeah.
That he built up his own sort of businesses, starting with that Studio Z. I mean that.
Exactly.
And he was doing a business, wasn't he, with Vaclav Havel selling toilet paper to Czechoslovakia or something?
Right, but he knew
they're things that he was sort of, see, America, that they celebrate that sort of mentality, and America, its wealth was built on tobacco. Let's face it, which helped build so many of the structures. And he's right in line with that sort of I don't know, is it an Ayn Rand character like Gary Cooper? And
that's heavy, because Frank's saying,
it's like, I mean, I don't I think that that's something which is another contradiction of his personality, because his support and of minorities and everything is extremely socialist. Let's face it, giving particularly at the time, and yet, okay, he had this sort of, you'd call it right-wing attitude to business. But getting back, I do think there is a difference once the threshold. I mean, Dennett says, and I use it as a quote in one of my last sonata, the Writing with Death one. He says, autonomous AI is on the horizon, and it's best kept that way. And I think for those reasons, it is a different technology. While we've got the off switch, okay, it's a tool. But will somebody release it into the wild, type of thing? It seems to me, I listen to people like Tegmark, who seems to me to be reputable, and I think they've got a point. So are there safeguards for it going rogue is what something I'm not really convinced by. I see, I read there's another forget his name, British guy, Michael Wooldridge, who's very sensible about AI not going this way. And so it's not like I'm a doomsayer, but there's just this niggling doubt in my mind that we'll keep it under our control. I hope it doesn't happen like that. And the wonderful things that it can do are significant, and they are, I hope that they come to fruition to save masses of suffering. We just have to find a clever way of keeping it as a technology, as a tool that we have some sort of human moral, ethical control over, I suppose.
It is in its baby stage, and it's our duty to raise it well. And it's not a simple subject right now. It's a complex subject, and I commend you for actually being able to entertain both points of view. That's what McLuhan said. Understanding is not having a point of view. In Zappa terms, in your lonely teenage room, you can go, I hate AI, or I love AI. But when you're with one or more people, if you take a suspended judgment, you're going to get the bigger picture, because people close down. Pascal the mathematician philosopher says, in order to understand anything, you have to know this end of the spectrum and that and everything in between. It's like, good luck. Who has the time? But then they bombard you with AI's good, AI's bad, you know, and then you're destined to take a point of view. That's fine, but in the big picture, you know, trying to be a comprehensivist is important. Anarchy, Utah Phillips says, anarchy is making rules for yourself and not other people. But that's really what freedom is making rules for yourself. So that you try to settle in and figure out what works. I mean, it's where we started, you know, what you said, to flourish and operate, feel a sense of satisfaction of what you're doing. So, you know, my first question is, what is the best thing for a human being? And Wilhelm Reich said the best thing for a human being is another human being.
Yep.
In the last question,
some would say to serve other people too.
Yeah. And then the last question is, what gives you the most optimism? That's what they asked Groucho Marx at the end of his life, and he said, other people. So it really is, it boils down to, you know, us sharing this time together, two people, you know.
Well,
so
I've thoroughly enjoyed it, Gerry. Thank you so much for indulging me.
Thank you, Michael. It's really been a pleasure and honor, and I've been so enlightened and learned so much. The more so, it feels like we become friends, and I hope this never ends. Even though I'm going to hit the end broadcast button, and we can keep talking forever and ever.
We probably could. You could.
Thank you, Michael. I love you, dude. That was really special. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Gerry.
Okay.